Why hello there, and welcome to what is the 166th episode of Digital Foundry Direct Weekly, our weekly show where we discuss the latest in gaming and technology news. How did I do, gents?
You did a good job, John. I'm very proud of you.
Was that suitably, Richard? As you can...
It was a little bit Ewan McGregor with the hello there in the beginning,
I see.
I can see it. Yeah.
I tried my best, guys, because, obviously I'm joined there by Alex Battaglia.
Hello, everyone.
And, of course, the man himself, Oliver McKenzie.
Yes, hello. Talk about the Jeffs here.
the Jeffs. The Jeffs. Yes, the kielbasa was in rare form yesterday. Jeff put on a good show. I'm actually pretty excited to talk about it. There's some good stuff here. There was also the Guerrilla Collective stuff, which maybe I'll mention a thing or two in there. We'll see. But as you can tell, Rich is out on assignment. You will find him on stage, I believe, at IGN Live on Sunday. So he is on a plane right now while we record this, so we can do whatever the heck we want.
The boss is not here. Let's go wild.
Exactly. As long as what we do is talk about Summer Game Fest. So let's get into it. Yes, last night, our time here in Europe at 11 p.m., Jeff Keighley rolled out his now yearly show, which has become sort of the E3 replacement. It's either the G3 now or the Jeff 3, the Keighley. Like there's a lot we can do with that, but it was a 2-hour show. There was a lot of stuff shown. We were warned beforehand to sort of temper our expectations, so I went in with tempered expectations, and I think there was some really cool stuff shown. So I've put together a list here of games we're going to discuss, and I say we go through it, gentlemen, starting with Lego Horizon Adventures, a game that has been sort of rumored for a while now. It's coming out later this year, it looks like. It is a brand new Lego game, which is not a series I think we typically pay attention to, but this one seems to be developed by a different studio than the traditional Traveler's Tales, and it has a completely different look as a result, because the Traveler's Tales games typically have Lego characters with somewhat realistic scenery, where here it's like the entire environment is made up of Legos, so it ends up looking really cool. But obviously, there's a lot of tech going on here as well, and the whole multi-platform situation. So, Alex, why don't you start us off on this one?
This was a really interesting one. I actually didn't expect this. I remember reading about this like very briefly, but I had forgotten about it until basically a day beforehand. And then I had so many questions as to like, oh wait, it's PC day and date? Oh, who's making this? We've really only seen Traveler's Tales making Lego games for what feels like 20 years. So yeah, very interesting to see it in the flesh here. And they did show it off in an interesting way. First, they start off with like pre-rendered CG that was labeled, by the way, which was good. They show off like what looks like 30 FPS path traced footage of Lego. Then they switch immediately after that little intro segment into what is gameplay recording at 60 FPS. And given this studio, it's a Brighton-based studio. I think they're called Gobo. It looks like a Unreal Engine 5 game. And the reason why I say that is mainly due to the shadow treatment. There's a lot of other hints in there, I think, too. But I think the shadow treatment really reminds me of VSMs. You can see a mixture of hard shadows for close-up objects and softer shadows mixing in with them from further away objects. And when they move, due to the fact that it's like reconstructed, you can see that like stippled look. And that's a very typical VSM look. And that's what it looked like to me. So I'm going to guess this is UE5. And it looked really, really good, generally.
Yeah.
Like John was saying, like, it did remind me a little bit of Lego Builder Adventure, which was a completely different engine altogether. But at least it was trying to get that look of Lego, that like plasticky look, as well, mixing in with some like PBR materials and screen space reflections here.
Yep.
Probably, like the ones that are available if you use Software Lumen based upon what the trailer looked like. I thought it looked really fantastic. What did you guys think, Oliver?
Yeah, I think it looks really good, and I think a lot of that is just the fidelity to materials, because I don't think there's like any elaborate path tracing or anything like that going on here. But they still managed to get the character of the Lego in a pretty good way. Like, you know, I mean, there's definitely lots of signs of like SSR in there, just the general look of the reflections. There's like some missing detail here and there. It looks a bit unstable. There's not that much blurring when there's movement either, which is kind of like more characteristic of RT, I think.
Right. Yeah.
But for an isometric game, which this appears to be, I think that works quite well because you don't actually have a lot of that kind of camera movement that's really going to cause lots of issues with occlusion. But, I mean, it looks like a proper Lego game, and I think a big part of that is the fact that they are actually building the entire environment out of Legos, like John mentioned. It's not like those Traveler's Tales games. It's more like Lego Builder's Journey, I think it is.
Yeah, that's right.
But this is much more elaborate than that title in terms of the scope of the environments, in terms of what they're trying to do with it, in terms of like the mechanical dinosaurs. It's just a much bigger interpretation of what that game pulled off back in 2021. So I think that's what's really interesting about this title. And it's all running at what looks like a pretty decent 60 FPS on presumably console target visuals here. So I think that's like really impressive as well. Just getting this in a good form on a console, looking this good with this much scope, it looks really quite impressive, I think.
Yeah, I tend to agree with all that, and I love the way the light, you know, if they're just using software lumen here, the GI really helps a lot, bringing sort of this stuff to life, and it starts to really look like little toys running around, which I think is a really neat trick. I mean, we've seen that before with Lego's Builder Journey, and to a lesser extent, the Traveler's Tales games. I do think the rise in seeing actual Lego brick-based environments might come down to geometry budgets from the past, because I think doing everything in Lego requires more triangles than you would think, right? Like the density in order to make sure like all those little studs are completely rounded looking.
And like the cylinders, all that.
There's cylinders, studs, there's so many round objects, and everything is like smooth and curved. And I feel like if you don't have the geometry to pull that off, it's not going to look great. And obviously they've gone nuts here. And just from the normal gameplay perspective, everything looks very rounded and very natural. Like it really is built out of these little bricks.
Yeah. Nanite's good for that kind of stuff, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Like, you're right. Nanite and Lego is kind of like a match made in heaven when you think about it. Like it's exactly the kind of thing that it's designed to do. They even have like the soft edges, like they're not like Legos don't have like a hard drop off, right? Like when it gets to the edge of a Lego piece, it's like very subtly like smoothed off, right?
Right.
And they've simulated all of that here. My only real, like Oliver, you said like you're right. There's not gonna, because of the fixed camera, perhaps occlusion artifacts will be somewhat minimal. But there's still several shots where you see the Lego characters running around and breaking the screen space reflections, which, I mean, I really wish it's nice to want things, but I feel like hardware lumen path would have made a really big difference here in terms of overall consistency. But hey, if they're doing all the main UE5 features and they're doing software lumen and they're doing 60 FPS, I can kind of understand it. The big question mark here, though, comes at the end where they announce that it's coming to PC, of course, but then also Nintendo Switch, which from a marketing standpoint makes a lot of sense, like because that kind of taps into the younger audience. It's a chance to reach Nintendo players that are perhaps, you know, Nintendo players can be of all ages, but I'm saying, you know, there's a large install base of kids playing on the Switch, and this might get them interested in at least one PlayStation IP, although you wouldn't talk about IP with children, I guess. So, but you see what I mean. But I did see some questions regarding the fact that it wasn't coming to it wasn't coming to PS4 at all, which I think kind of suggests to me, though, that Sony themselves have decided they no longer want to support the PS4, right? Like, I think this is kind of showcases a marked effort where they're like, okay, we're done with PlayStation 4 for now. Hopefully. That would be good. And then also there was, I guess, perhaps unsurprisingly, no Xbox version announced, but realistically, I don't see what that would do for them. So it's not really worth it.
It's interesting. Well, there is obviously a number of Xboxes being sold. The fact that it's a PlayStation Studio game that isn't, baseball. There's really, I can't imagine why Sony, like, I'm pretty sure Lego, from the Lego side of things, they really wanted it on Switch. They have a pretty good history of releasing on Nintendo platforms, even Nintendo exclusive games, if I'm not mistaken. So I think that makes a lot of sense. The lack of Xbox is mainly down to the Sony side of things. But, you know, at the end of the day, you're getting this day and date on Switch. PC and PS5 there, and based upon the fact that this is on Switch, it obviously could run on PS4 or Xbox Series S. So
what's it going to look like though?
I'm very curious about that. Switch is
I think that's
really old in comparison to the PS5. So
it's tough. I mean, Lego Builder's Journey did ship on Switch as well as all console platforms and high-end PCs, obviously. But I think in that case, you're dealing with a much smaller game built on Unity, and they didn't have SSR on Switch or on tablets or anything like that, mobile phones. But it still looked pretty good. They were just using pretty regular shadow maps there, and it was a smaller world, so I feel like it was able to scale a little bit better onto those platforms. Whereas here you have I don't know. I have no idea how this is going to scale. Obviously, you have a ton of reflections, massive, huge reflective world, and then all this complex shadow rendering and the nanite.
Just get rid of it all. Just get rid of it all.
Yeah, I can't imagine it would look too hot, but I guess we'll have to wait and see.
I mean, they can make great looking Lego games on Switch. There's just a matter of how far they're willing to go, and they're going to have to cut out all this advanced UE5 features.
Like how far they can scale this game.
Yeah, how can they scale this game back? And like, what are they willing to do to the art to make sure that it still looks good without using any of those technologies? To me, though, it seems like kind of a pain on the development side because, if you're using things like Lumen, for instance, that's how you light your world, right? And suddenly, we have to have an alternative, older lighting solution as well. So you're basically working with two sets of art. Well, it's, same art, but like you're arting the game differently based on platform, which seems like a lot of extra work.
They actually did that with the Talos Principle 2 on Series S. They had a whole different lighting system.
Really?
Yeah, they had.
I forgot about that. That's right.
Yeah, non-lumen lighting system where they just kind of placed fill lights here and there and relied a lot on ambient.
How did it look?
So. Not very good. But also that was a game that I think is probably smaller in scope than this, probably a lot smaller in scope, has a lot less dynamism in the environments.
Oh, for sure.
Isn't doing anything like this. So I think it's a totally different question as to what they were doing with that title. But I mean, I guess it can be done if they throw a lot of artists at the problem. How well it works out, I'm not sure.
Performance is always the question. The one thing to mention here in regards to performance, it did look like a pretty solid 60 FPS throughout most of the trailer. It did. But we did do some counts. I did 2 screens and someone confirmed with me the other one. But it was like internally, it looked like some sort of upsampling was being used to get it to a crisper 4K. But the HUD was counted at 1440p, interestingly, in the shot I counted. And also the gameplay was like a little bit above 1080p, which kind of puts it in the realm of like some of the UE5 titles we've seen this generation. Sometimes they go a bit lower when it's a lot more chaotic, like Lords of the Fallen. We know that goes really low. So we'll see. But, I think based upon what they showed so far, it looked really reasonable for a current generation game, especially one that was targeting 60 FPS. And once again, we don't know if this is UE5. I haven't seen any confirmation anywhere.
That's true.
But it does look very UE5 to my eyes. And if I'm wrong, forgive me, please.
I mean, technically they could have leveraged Decima, even though Gorilla's not the main developer, but they're obviously assisting
Decima
on the project.
Switch.
Yeah, you're right. Sorry.
Yeah, that's not going to show up on those platforms, right?
That would not happen.
Switch Decima.
That would not happen. So yeah, it's probably UE5. It almost, I can't imagine what else it would be.
Yeah,
there's no other multi-platform engine that supports all those features quite like that, I'd say.
I mean, Unity, but it doesn't look like Unity.
It doesn't look like Unity here.
No. Okay, guys, we got that one covered. The next one, though, is, it's Metaphor Refantazio. I don't know. What a weird name. So this is obviously an Atlas joint, right? Yeah. And with staff that worked on Persona, I guess. And this seems to be a new IP, which looks interesting. It has elements that remind me of other Megaten games, I would say. But obviously from a technology standpoint, what do you expect? It's doing what they do. I think it looks visually nice, but it's obviously still, using some of their technology from the past, I would say. I don't know. What do you think, Oliver?
Yeah, I think probably the highlight with modern Atlas titles, especially like the Persona games, is the menu designs, which look always really fantastic. They kind of design these titles from what's been reported. They design them around the menu design as like their starting point for actually building the games. They really
That's
integrate the menus into the actual gameplay, which I think is cool. So the menu designs look fantastic. You have this kind of painterly style where they're kind of redrawing the artwork every so often to give it kind of a bit of a shimmer almost. It gives it kind of a bit of an appeal to the eye, which I think is cool. Technically speaking, beyond that, it looks a lot like Persona 5 to me. A lot of that comes down to the way the textures look and the way the artwork is put together, but it looks a lot like that to me. And in terms of just the technical makeup, like going through the basics, there's no motion blur. The post-processing is pretty simple. They're using depth of field, but it's just a simple Gaussian blur.
Like FXA, no it looks like, or none.
No anti-aliasing. I don't think there's anti-aliasing, to be honest with you. There's good baked lighting in the interiors, but in the exteriors, there isn't too much of a simulation of indirect lighting. And I would really bet this is the Persona 5 engine because of those concessions.
So this could probably run on the PS Triple then, if we're honest.
It's running on it's running on PS4.
Right, but
yeah,
Persona 5 did ship on PS3 and it looked roughly the same as the PS4 version.
Yeah, this has a much bigger scope. Bigger scope.
We'll see.
And
I will wait to play this until it comes to the PS Triple.
Backport. I thought this one looked cool from a gameplay perspective. I have never played a Persona game, but I do like the emphasis on what looks like, I don't know, it kind of looked party based, but you like bring out different party members depending upon what you're doing. But you have like a variety of party that you can put at a time. Like they mentioned in the gameplay that the amount of actions you get is scales with the amount of characters you have out in your party at one moment. I tend to like these type of games, and the fact that Oliver mentioned that they designed the menus first makes a lot of sense because you're basically playing with the menu. The visuals seem more like the thing that dramatizes the gameplay, and they're just there for visual sakes,
right?
So,
it's a turn-based RPG.
Yeah. You spend a lot of time looking at menus, and I mean, this game, outside of the tech stuff, it does seem a lot like the Persona games. Mm-hmm. It's in a very different setting, and there's some gameplay tweaks, but it's still like a turn-based, party-based game with like social links. So you'll talk with characters, and you'll progress through the game schedule, and there's like a fusion system for creating new characters and new enemies and things like this. And there's a mix of anime style and in-engine cutscenes and all that. Like it's a very familiar game for people who played games like these, but I think Atlas does them really well, and they're it's like their unique house style at this point, for good or for bad, is these kind of Persona style titles. And we also saw this with like Soul Hackers 2 a couple years ago and whatnot. So they do these games really well, and I'm excited to see what they do with it. For sure, I'll be interested in taking a look at this one when it comes out. But yeah, it's nothing too special technically, and I think Alex, you counted it out at like 1728p or so.
Yeah.
So it's just pretty bog standard, like targeting 60 FPS probably in the premium consoles at least, doing a pretty good job of it. No anti-aliasing, but decent resolution. That's pretty much, par for the course with Atlas.
Right. Sounds about right. And I look forward to your video, Oliver, because I suspect...
this is an Oliver video.
Yep. I mean, I like these games too. I probably will play it, but this is your bread and butter, man. We'll get you on this. But the next game, though, on the list that we wanted to talk about actually is... this is kind of a dark horse of a game that kind of came and went. And this has a lot of connections to Alex joining Digital Foundry, actually. It's Kingdom Come Deliverance 2. It's still running on CryEngine. And that initial comment comes from the very first time that Rich met you. You went nuts just going through the console commands of KCD1. Thanks to the familiarity from Crysis, of course. You spend a lot of time in the console. And he's just like, oh my God, look at all this. Is great. You're just like doing all this tweaks. And that's when he was sold on you, Alex.
Yeah, that was a fun time. That had to have been February of 2018.
Yeah.
Wasn't it? Yeah, it had to have been. That's awesome. Yeah, good memories there. This one is, I mean, we've already seen this revealed before, but this was a little bit, showed a lot more environments, emphasized a lot more humor, which I found a little, I mean, the first game is like the main character is kind of known as being kind of like a ditz or like a klutz. Yeah. He's not, that he's a simple blacksmith.
But he's a simple man, but it's a very serious game overall, I would say.
Yeah, obviously dealing with serious historical things. And I did like everything they showed off in this trailer. at least from a visual standpoint. Characters rendering is always an interesting thing here because I actually liked the character models from the first game, but you could obviously see where budgetary and just time constraints led them, and perhaps technological constraints too. I'm actually not sure how much performance capture they did, PCAP. So I think this time around they did mention in their last video that they're doing like a more full performance capture. So I think the facial rendering looks good. Serviceable for what you're getting in this game, but it's mainly about like the environments and I think the interaction, like the granular interaction with the RPG systems in the game. And I think that's the really interesting thing here. There was one shot in the trailer when a character is being dragged along the ground by some soldiers, where the reflections right next to them all made me wonder what I was seeing. Obviously, we're gonna have to wait for the final game to get out here. Yeah, we haven't.
That looks bizarre.
Yeah, that is bizarre. I don't know what that was, but we'll see when this comes out. They're obviously going to be using sparse voxel octree global illumination, which is this CryEngine staple since what feels like a decade now. Kind of crazy how they've been doing software ray tracing for a decade while everyone was just like, nah. But yeah, well, they'll be using that, but will they be iterating on CryEngine's technology for themselves? Will they be integrating later versions of CryEngine that we haven't seen? Like the last time we saw a modern version of CryEngine was like, oh my gosh, like even Crysis Remastered is like a weird hodgepodge of old and new CryEngine. So, you know, it's interesting to see. I don't know what they're going to do, but I'm excited to see when it comes out. And if it's anything like their last title, it'll be really, really pushing the CPU side of things. Like you could really scale that game back when it came out on the GPU quite well, just, you know, adjusting settings and like that. But getting the CPU performance to be better was really hard due to the amount of AI and just the amount of stuff usually on screen. So I'm curious to see, they already announced that it's 30 FPS on consoles.
Wow.
With some sort of interview. So I imagine if it's anything like that, it's probably because like the first game, it's ridiculously, like the first game was ridiculously CPU limited. Like it was one of the most, at that time period, like we'd been on PS4 and Xbox One for so long. Everything was like 130 FPS on any CPU on PC. But this game was like, you're good, you're lucky to get 40. You know, that's the kind of game it was.
Which is why it was always nuts that they managed to get it running surprisingly well on Switch. Like the version on Switch is pretty good, all things considered.
They did a lot for that. Really.
So it's pretty legit. I just gotta, I love, sometimes you gotta reflect back on yourself and what Digital Foundry does. And like this idea of like, if you look here in this puddle of blood where this person was just murdered, look very carefully around the wound. You can see the reflection of the, you know, that kind of, I think that's great.
I think we maxed out on that when we did GTA 5. That you were there for that, Oliver. And we were like, well, if you watch this woman twist for like 30 minutes, you can see her hair dithered. And
if you look in the strip club, if you look at those feet, that kind of looks like RTGI, right, Alex?
Yeah, that was one of the better moments of Digital Foundry.
No, I think this looks really good for the most part. The lighting looks fantastic. The reflections, whatever they're doing with the reflections, there's some like kind of weird stuff when like the character opens up his helmet and the reflected detail, and it makes me think they're doing something beyond just SSR, although there are those weird artifacts when they're dragging that guy like you mentioned.
Yeah.
The way the metals look is really good. I don't know what they're doing for the reflections there, but it does look really good.
The metal looks awesome.
Really pleasing.
I agree.
Yeah, it looks awesome. But yeah, I think this looks really strong. Just the characters aren't quite up that level, and it's kind of a bit of a, you know, maybe
it's
not
hard to do.
Like, yeah, it's hard to do probably with given the scope of the title. It's a kind of harder thing to do for sure. But I think everything else looks really good. Those rolling fields of grass with like no real LOD issues, at least from what we can see in this footage, that all looks really good. So I think it's a title to look out for sure.
Also, they didn't show it. We've seen other trailers of this, like the gameplay reveal, and this as well. They do a lot of great stuff with the first-person animation work, like swinging swords, using the different weapons. Like it actually looks really convincing and good, and that's actually something that you can't take for granted. It's like connecting the camera movement to the way that the arms move and everything. That can look awesome. There was also some really nice shots actually in the original trailer where you could really get that beautiful sort of like light spilling into the room look, you know. Which was like here, if you look at this shot right here, I think I'm such a sucker for that kind of stuff.
Oh yeah. Skylighting in a room.
Skylighting in a room.
Yeah.
And there was some already impressive sort of windowsill lighting in the original that you could sort of enable that was quite heavy, but it looked awesome. If you remember that. But yeah, so that's looking great. I think that's coming out this year, isn't it?
Yeah, it should be. Yeah.
That'll be an interesting title to examine. We're happy to see CryEngine sort of return once again in a big game. We know Crysis 4 is obviously in development, and there's always Hunt, but it's nice to see there's still a non-Crytek studio doing something with the engine. And as you know, CryEngine is really well suited to large open outdoor areas with a lot of interactive foliage and just like granular detail in a way that sometimes maybe even Unreal Engine isn't the best. So
yeah, at least for performance, like I always feel like CryEngine obviously had its own quandaries for a lot of things, but it always felt like at least that performance was pretty stable. If it was just low maybe, but it was stable at least.
Exactly. So that's going to do it for that one. Next up, briefly talk about is Sonic Cross Shadow Generations, which, first of all, I think you all noticed that this was one of those trailers that was presented where all the gameplay footage was, well, actually, looking on Sega's site, it does show it at 60. But at Jeff Con, when they showed it, it was just 30 FPS across the board, which is weird. So
yeah,
actually, before we get into this, that's actually one of the weirdest things about last night I noticed was when watching the show SGF Live, it was streamed in a 4K container, but they actually just upscaled from like 1080p using like nearest neighbor scaling, which I am a fan of nearest neighbor. I'm just surprised that they basically took a 1080p feed and put it into a 4K container and then upscaled it using that method, which suggests that they were most likely using OBS to do it, because OBS has that feature, unless they were using a RetroTink 4K or like Pixel FX Morph. Because those three options are really the only way to like cleanly do a live like nearest neighbor upsample in real time like that. So I was really like, how are they doing this and why? So
it was a very good question. So this is one of the ones that makes me always question a little bit. John's probably going to be all over this game when it comes out, but like the way to advertise a Sonic game is definitely not by showing it off with like poor frame rate. I feel like because Sonic moves so quickly, Shadow moves so quickly in these games, like the stuff they're showing is like so, other than the cinematics, which are like kind of slow-mo and whatever, but like they move so fast. So if you show it off at 30 FPS, it just looks really, really framey, especially with no motion blur, which this doesn't have.
The one on Sega's channel, though, is 60. So
the gameplay 60?
Just the gameplay is 60.
It looks kind of variable to me.
It's got some variability, which is weird.
Yeah, that's the main thing. Like it just, they said they recorded on PC, and the capture, it says on the bottom, captured 4K PC, I believe. But like, my goodness, a PC can definitely manage this game.
What if they just use NVIDIA Share? And they had like a VRR monitor or something. Because if you just like turn on NVIDIA Share and you're like using VRR, using the raw monitor, and it doesn't match the video container, you get a lot of this sort of frame inconsistencies, as we know from experience. Like,
and then you put it in at 60.
Dude, that absolutely could be the case. Like, no joke.
Well, then you got to really learn, like, PR departments should, not be using NVIDIA Share unless like really push comes to shove. Like there's no good reason to do that. You should really be capturing the game in a more dedicated manner.
I am completely confident that this is going to run very well. This is based on an old game. It's based on Sonic Generations, right? There is new content and work being done on it, but we've seen other Hedgehog engine games since then. Obviously, there was Sonic Forces, which did run at 60 on last-gen consoles, and then there was Sonic Frontiers, which on the current-gen consoles this generation was indeed 60 FPS, although all the preview footage was not good, not stable at all, but the final game runs quite well. So there's no issues there. And this is obviously not nearly as complex of a game compared to Sonic Frontiers. So I do believe it will run at 60, at least on the current consoles. And frankly, it should run at 60 on the last generation PS4 and Xbox One as well. I think Switch will probably be 30, unfortunately. Sonic Forces and Frontiers were both 30. And I think they could get to 60 in certain with some... I don't know. It would take a lot of work that maybe they're not going to put in. We'll wait and see how it is. But But either way, I'm moderately excited for it because I've played so much Sonic Generations, so I'm not really sure how much is going to be new for it, but I do think Generations was probably the best of the 3D style Sonic games. It's quite a fun game to play. They really have this sort of rhythm to it where you're kind of like you're dashing, you're dropping, you're going under things. It's just like responding to challenges really quickly and getting a really fast line to the level that feels great. And I think they nailed it here. And it's just the feeling of, and the game absolutely has motion blur in its original incarnation, like a lot of it actually. So I assume the final one will as well. I guess there was motion blur in the gameplay footage, right? Let me look.
I don't recall that.
Yeah, there is.
Is it just so janky that it's hard to tell or something like that?
No, it's actually it doesn't look nearly as heavy though as it if you look at footage of the original Sonic Generations, you see like when you start moving, the motion blur is really you can see it at if you go to 48 seconds in the trailer.
All right.
You can kind of see it, right? But the thing about what I remember is that there was per object motion blur on Sonic as well. So I'm curious to see what they do with that. But yeah, the cutscenes were always low quality in that original, so I'm curious to see what they do there. Like they were 720p, like low quality FMV cinematics on every platform, so it looked like garbage on PC as well.
Yeah.
And you can play the original Sonic Generation right now at 60 on Xbox as well, in backwards compatibility.
Oh yeah,
right. You did a video on that.
Yeah.
You took a look at that. Yeah.
So I don't know. Do you guys have anything to say about Sonic? I don't know, Oliver, Alex.
The next time we may cover it actually might be due to that mod, right? The path tracing mod from Scythe.
Oh man, that does look good.
That does look really good, actually. So maybe we'll even cover it before it comes out. We'll see.
We'll see. I will probably cover this depending on what else is around at the time, but looks interesting to me. So keeping an eye on that. Next up is another thing that's interesting to me. After all this time, Alan Wake 2 getting a physical release, which I think is great. That's awesome. Mm-hmm. And even though in my case, I ended up playing the game on PC, and that's obviously going to be the preferred version, I still would like to have a hard copy of the game, like a fully updated hard copy. So I will definitely pick that up. I got to put my money where my mouth is on this as well. So I'm going to do that. They also announced some very interesting DLC called Night Springs, of course, which look bonkers. There's a lot of like Remedy cinematic universe crossover going on in there, it seems.
Yeah.
So what do you guys think of that?
Isn't it supposed to be three distinct gameplay types across the DLC, which reminds me of a lot of games have done that actually in the past. Metro used to do that. 4A games did that. But I think Night Springs was the original name of American Nightmare before it came out. And it's also, if you play Remedy stuff, Night Springs is all throughout their games. And here, I'm actually curious about what the parts are. The one part, like we could see, is his name Sean Astin? Sorry, no, not Sean Astin. What's the name of the character who plays the sheriff in this game? He was also the main character in Quantum Break. I forget the name of the actor. We saw
Sean Ashmore.
Sean Ashmore.
Close.
Thank you. Sean Astin is someone else, probably. We got him. We got the lady from the diner, and as well as Jesse from Control. But I'm very curious about what the control sections are exactly, because Jesse will control very differently, presumably, than those other characters. The question I'm thinking is like, does she control like she does in Control, like which is a completely different game set? Like, yep. I don't have no idea what they're going to be doing here. That's the DLC aspect I'm most interested in, actually, because I really like Control.
Yeah, I mean, this looks a little bit faster paced from what I can see in this footage, and that's kind of attractive. I think I prefer something like a little brisker, like the original Alan Wake, and not so much its sequel, although I think I'm probably alone in that.
No, you're definitely not. I've seen other people express that, but I kind of feel like the original Alan Wake was way too repetitive for its own good.
It was repetitive.
Completely.
But it had some charms for sure. I don't know. Beyond that, like, I think the idea of mixing and matching characters from other Remedy games is really fun. Technically, like, this all looks really fantastic. There's one shot of a waitress in a mirror where I think they're probably using a planar reflection just because that would not play so nicely on the consoles, I suspect, if they were just relying on RT. But yeah, it's cool. I mean, I love shadow drops, and this is basically a shadow drop or close to it. It's out today. It was announced yesterday, so that's always very fun, and I'm glad that the game is getting a physical release after all. So that's a good time for sure.
Cool. Other stuff, Phantom Blade Zero was shown again at the end of the show. I think that was revealed sometime last year, maybe, but it is still very much clearly sort of a Souls-like experience. It would
incredibly looking Souls-like experience.
Yeah. And
this was one where I posted a screenshot of it in chat. This is a game that does not show off well on YouTube, unfortunately.
No,
it's very dark, like gray, green, black, fast moving with motion blur. If you take any still from this trailer, it looks like 720p. It's not. It's not.
You can't see anything. Yeah, it's a complete mess. And it's very likely UE5 based on what we're seeing, I would say.
That sounds reasonable.
Yeah, it's confirmed.
Okay, it is confirmed. So yeah. So it is indeed. It's hard to say what. So this is who's making this one again? Do you guys remember off the top of your head?
It's a studio that I don't actually recall. That's why I remember from last year.
It's a new one. S-Game.
S-Game. So S-Game. What the heck have they done?
It's a mystery to me.
I'm slow.
The music was a bit of East meets West in the trailer. If you noticed, there was like some twanging that you might expect from a Wild West.
It's a Chinese.
Yeah, they are Chinese. Yeah,
but then obviously there was some traditional Chinese instruments later on. So I think they are trying to do a like Wild West meets I don't know, Chinese folklore kind of look to everything. It would seem faster paced than your typical Souls game, though. It didn't look like Demon Souls,
more
for
like
example.
Sekiro. I would say.
Like that. Yeah. Also, maybe like some Bloodborne dodging in there.
We're kind of joking about this a little bit, but versus so many other popular types of games out there, Souls-likes are easily my favorite of the bunch. I think they're like they're solid. Like you get it's like Souls-likes today are kind of like a platformer game in the 90s where it's like it's a bread and butter kind of experience, but it's when done well, it's very rewarding and sort of engaging to like, because they're games that don't just hold your hand and you really have to like learn and master in a way, and I think that's very satisfying. So
I think this animates really well too, like just the action sets and all that. It looks very responsive and it looks very pleasing to play, which I think is great. And overall, this looks like a really competent looking UE5 title. It comes together really nicely. You have great looking assets and environments, and like especially the indirectly lit stuff comes together pretty well. The only thing that I'm worried about from this footage is the frame rate, which looks a little variable in this footage. And normally I wouldn't be one to comment too much on the state of a pre-release game's performance. But in this case, getting a UE5 title like this to hit a solid 60 on the console seems like potentially a bit of a challenge. And I think of the UE5 games that do use Lumen, I think just Jusant and Fortnite hit a pretty consistent 60 with those technologies. So I think it's a little bit of a question mark as to how a game that looks like this, that has this amount of high fidelity assets, that's trying to tie together environments of this complexity, if that can actually hit 60 FPS in the consoles. Now, of course, you could do like LFC, 120 hertz container, whatever. But just in terms of hitting like a really consistent 60, which I think a lot of players will probably expect from a title like this, it's a tough one, as we've seen obviously with
Lords of the Fallen.
With Lords of the Fallen, that was a tough one.
It's running pretty well these days, though. Now, isn't it?
Has some bad moments.
It's better than launch, but like if you play it, man, I don't know. I don't think it still runs very well.
I feel like an occasional stutter drop is no big deal compared to like, sustained lows. And it seems like it's mostly just like hiccups rather than like sustained bad performance.
Well, it does have sustained bad performance too. It's just not.
Okay.
Yeah, like that's the thing. Like when Tom.
But that was like a uniquely bad.
Yeah.
Effort in terms of tech. So I'm not comparing it to that necessarily.
But like obviously
was
RoboCop? I forget. I only played on PC. How was that on consoles? I think you
so
said it all right. I can't remember.
It did have a 60 FPS targeting mode on PS5 and Series X. And it hit 60 in a lot of content, but in larger firefights,
I see. It would
larger stuff, it tended to dip, especially like as you got deeper into the game,
Right.
as you got more complex areas, it just would consistently dip whenever there was any kind of action on screen. So that was not an ideal experience. I think UE5 in general for targeting 60 FPS on console, I think you have to be pretty careful with it, in my opinion, from what I've seen so far. It's not something that you can just scale to 60. It's something like John often says, you have to target it from the start of development. It's a tough one with that engine in particular. So I'd be interested to see how that pans out.
We gotta wait for the coalition to show up next week, hopefully.
Oh yeah, they're gonna probably show us all the real power of UE5 on current gen consoles.
Yeah.
That's probably the way
They're gonna find the GPU in the power brick.
Yes, they will, exactly. We're recording this before the Xbox showcase, where we anticipate that we will see that at last, and hopefully, if based on their history, if what we know based on their history is true, this will indeed show us what UE5 can really do. So I can't wait. It's
kind of amazing. Like they did that. Like I'm pretty sure Gears 4 was the first time where we saw UE4 on console, and we were like, you know what, this can work. This can actually work.
They did it,
and they did a really good job of that. And Gears 5 was even more of that.
It's still a high water mark, I would say. Like Gears 5 is still stunning.
Yeah, take a look at any cutscene from Gears 5, and you would have trouble even situating it within a generation. I think.
Right.
It's that good looking. So. Ooh, I'm excited for that, but that has nothing to do with the Jeffs.
Their HDR was so good in that game, and most other UE4 games, I think, fall short in that regard. So
yes, yeah,
but yes,
and also, really good PC versions generally. Like they actually care about that. It's kind of amazing in this day and age when like
the coalition,
oh my God.
This guy's man. But we should keep to the Jeffs. Next one I want to talk about is the polar opposite of this like dark, gritty Unreal Engine powered fantasy. It's Power Rangers Rita's Rewind. So part of me was like, oh man, another pixel art brawler. You know, I love those, but they're hard to do right, and there's been a lot of them lately, sort of like preying on nostalgia. Some get it right, some get it really right, but the ones that don't really don't. But I gotta say, this looks pretty darn awesome based on the trailer. It's a nice mix. So it is obviously pixel art still, but it's a nice mix of gameplay types. Like they're doing a lot of super scaler style, like 3D into the camera stuff, and like it seems like it has a lot of variety and sort of mixes things up. Plus the art and animation are excellent at least on the pixel art. I don't really like the animated non-game scenes that they show in the trailer.
Yeah, those look almost out of place. They look cheaper than the game almost. Yeah, the
game itself though, it looks legitimately super great. Like it's beautiful pixel art design, great animation work, and all that variety. It really comes down to whether they fundamentally understand the pillars of the brawler that I've gone over before, which is to say that's really difficult to pull off, because these types of games can become repetitive and boring if you don't nail the core moveset and the core actions. Like every time you punch something, it needs to feel satisfying, but there needs to be enough depth to sort of allow that to remain fun throughout. And, not too many get that right, I'm sorry to say. But there have been some high profile ones. The recent Turtles game, Final Vendetta, Streets of Rage 4, those are all top tier. And hopefully this one will be as well. I guess we'll find out soon. I don't know. What do you guys think? Anything to say on it?
I'm curious about the music, because the trailer used the Power Rangers theme with modern, high quality, real singing and real tuned guitars and all that. But will this be chiptune? Like, what exactly will the music be in the game? I'm actually curious about that. Because, you can keep the art style consistent, but how do you keep music style consistent with the retro theme? I'm always curious about that.
Yeah. Also, it was announced, actually, the composer for the Power Rangers game, it's Sean Bialo, who worked with T. Lopes on Penny's Big Breakaway. And he also did, Donut Dodo, which sounds silly, but Sean is up and coming. I'm telling you, he is going to become one of the best composers that you will know in this industry going forward. So keep an eye on Sean's work. I think what he's already demonstrated in the games that he's worked on, it's unbelievably good. So I think this is going to have an absolutely stunning soundtrack. I mark my words on that. We'll revisit that statement when it comes out later. but I can't wait to see that. Moving on, a couple more to mention. I did want to briefly mention Slitterhead because we finally got to see the trailer, and it has that name, which is something. So this is actually formed by Bokeh Game Studios, which is comprised of creators that previously worked at Sony on things such as the Siren series, which obviously this channel's into, as well as Gravity Days / Gravity Rush. And they've obviously gone back to the horror aesthetic, but the gameplay looks, I gotta admit, it looks really interesting and different. It seems to amount to this sort of possession system where they're showing people running around these environments and like sort of sending out some sort of like controllable pulse thing that then goes into another character, any random character, and possesses them. And there's lots of strange creatures, and I don't know. Can you guys parse what the heck is going on in this?
I don't know.
It's tough.
I really don't know, John. I had trouble understanding what I was seeing when we were watching.
Right. Like, I don't know how to. Well, actually, let me just say that's actually a good thing for me, because I feel like these days when I watch most video game trailers these days, you hear about it. I can pretty much guess exactly what the game is going to be, the how it's going to feel, like everything about it. I feel like I just know it, like intuitively now. There's not that much in terms of surprise where, oh yeah, I look at this and it's like, it may play good or not good, but this is what it's basically going to be. And I'm usually right. I think you guys have that same intuition now, right? We've seen enough games where there's not really much left where you look at something like, oh, I wonder what that's going to be. This one is a case where I really can't fully parse what you're going to do in it, and I think that's kind of exciting.
Mm-hmm.
There's some stuff in here that reminds me of the, I think, 2014 indie game, The Swapper, if you remember that.
Dude, yes, I love The Swapper.
Yes, where you're changing between people in the environment and you're using it to solve puzzles and platforming challenges. There's a sequence in this trailer that reminded me a lot of The Swapper, but in a different context in 3 dimensions, things like this. So if it's doing some interesting concepts like that game was, I think that was a really brilliant game. This could be a really compelling title, but we'll have to see.
Heck yeah. I can't really tell what type of technology they're running here, though. It doesn't really look like typical. It doesn't look like an Unreal game. I mean, it could technically be Unity maybe, but I'm not even sure about that. It just has a unique look to it. But unfortunately, in the trailer, as it is, the frame rate is very rough, and I really hope they can solve that.
Mm-hmm.
If they can't get it stable, then it should be at least have a 30 FPS cap. But as it is, especially it's coming to last gen as well. I can't imagine that this would launch with such a unstable frame rate on modern machines.
On the current gen, then
we'll see.
I would doubt it. We'll see.
Either way, interesting title. Obviously, their legacy sort of piqued my interest to begin with, and then just the gameplay style being so unusual is also interesting. So I think we'll keep an eye on that. The last one we wanted to mention was when they first showed the trailer. When the trailer started running, I was like, "Wait, is this like a ball sack running around with pistols?" That's kind of what it looked like, but no, it's actually a bean.
Right.
It's
right.
Like a coffee bean, like a coffee bean.
No, it's like a garbanzo bean or something.
What?
Did you see it?
Yeah, I watched. I definitely watched it, but I thought it was a coffee bean. Maybe I'm bad. I don't know.
Wait, is it like the brown color is very not coffee bean though. Coffee bean is like way darker.
Right.
This just looks
a good coffee bean would be a dry old
it could be a light
piece of crap. It's like a light roast. Like,
I mean,
who knows?
It's trying to be sort of this like serious, like spy, like sort of your. It's no one lives forever except for you're a bean who can jump through windows. And it seems to be an indie project. So, I mean,
I think they said it was a solo dev.
Solo devy. I mean, there's usually going to be other people involved, but I'll be curious to see exactly what it looks like in terms of credits. But it's super strange. I genuinely can't understand this idea.
I mean, if it is solo dev, I don't feel bad. Like, I thought this reminds me a bit of Goat Simulator, where it's like really edging on like, oh, this is a meme. I'm not a big fan of that, but if the gameplay's fine, so be it.
I think this looks a lot
Whatever.
more interesting than Goat Simulator, though. Like, there seems to be actual like shooting mission mechanics, and in a sense, it almost reminded me of Just Cause, but with a giant weird bean as the character. My only real concern is that when you're playing in the third person perspective, you're always looking at this bean shape, and it's just. I'm not.
There was some first person parts, weren't there? I swear.
Like,
so I don't know. Maybe it changes up depending upon what level you were in or what button you press. It's really hard to tell.
There's almost an element to this that reminds you of like, weirdly, I don't know if you guys will share this, but Conquer.
No, I get
like
it.
a bit of an action movie thing.
Yeah, you're right.
It
does have a bit of that Conquer vibe to it, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, but
old school, but
this one seems like it's not at all like it's it would as if it was made by someone who isn't in on the joke. Conquer is obviously made as a like they expressly are constantly always calling out the fact that it is a joke. But this one here, It was going for a different vibe. I think that's kind of funny, but once again, maybe not my thing.
So the last thing to discuss. So there was a lot of other games shown as well. Too many to discuss just for the show, unfortunately. But one thing that came up was they showed a new trailer for Black Myth Wukong, and it gave it a release date, but it was CG, I believe. So there wasn't really much to see from the gameplay. But then it was revealed after that it's shipping day one on PlayStation 5 and PC. And then they put up a thing basically saying, yeah, it's still coming to Xbox. Actually, I got the exact quote here. It says, PC and PS5 users can enjoy the full game starting August 20th, 2024. We are currently optimizing the Xbox Series X/X version, which, by the way, if I can just comment, when they brought it, they showed Monster Hunter, the new Monster Hunter game. They brought out one of the creators, and trying to say Xbox Series X and S in Japanese it is really difficult indeed. But anyway, it said we're trying to optimize that version to meet our quality standards, so it won't release simultaneously with the other platforms. We apologize for the delay and aim to minimize the wait for Xbox users. We will announce the release date as soon as it meets our quality standards. So, Alex, I'm kind of curious when you hear a statement like that. What do you think? Like, how does that read to you? Like, what's going on here?
Well, I imagine the Xbox Series X version is just the PS5 version with a different API.
Yeah.
But the Series S version is memory constrained. They have the scalability options from UE5 that they are going to make expressly available on PC, of course. But getting within memory is probably the larger question. They can scale down Lumen to everything. And I think this is maybe like a Baldur's Gate 3 kind of thing where they really want to have like a polished product out at least by a certain date. But to get the Xbox Series S version polished to a level where they feel actually comfortable releasing it expressly requires more working hours. So I think it's that. I think the Series X version is probably already fine,
Reminds me of what you said earlier, Oliver, about Talos Principle 2 having a Series S specific option where, so you think it's Series S. I tend to agree. I think it's probably just requiring a little more time. There was, of course, people very quick to rush out and say, oh, the Sony must have money hatted the game and blah, 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 which I think is just hilarious and clearly incorrect. Like they would need to do that for this, but I think we got to take the developer at their word here. They want to ship on Xbox. They can't. That's the thing about a statement like this, though. They can't come out and single out just the Series S in a statement, right? And they can't just release on Series X either. Like, there's no technical reason why Series X version shouldn't be basically the same or better, or basically around similar as the PS5 version, just a different API, like you say, Alex. But as we know from other UE5 titles, there are concessions that need to be made for Series S, and it's usually in terms of memory requirements. So it does seem likely that that's what's going on here. And I mean, they were open about it, at least, right?
Well, yeah, with Baldur's Gate 3, they just came out and said it.
That's true. That's true. They did.
They just said, we can't ship split screen. So let us not ship split screen. We can ship a game. And they did. It shipped, I think, 2 or 3 months later than the PS5 code.
Yep.
But it did ship. Here, you're looking at a situation where on Series S, you do have some tools, I think, with UE5, even within the Lumen lighting path to get performance up. So, for instance, if they're using Lumen reflections on PS5 and Series X, that's something that you can cut out. And that's something we've seen with a lot of games, like with RoboCop, with Hellblade 2 as well, that lumen reflections is just gone on Series S. And for the most part, it looks fine because, a lot of lumen reflections is just SSR anyway. Layer the SSR on. You don't get the fallback. It's okay. It's not the end of the world. GI, you can't really scale that unless you're going crazy with fill lights and have a big art team or something. Or you're dealing with a very limited title like Talos Principle. And then on the memory side of things, of course, that's probably going to be the biggest hurdle for any cross-platform title to try to get that up and running on Series S. So, yeah, I think you're looking at probably a variety of challenges, and probably they're looking at the Xbox version saying, hey, that's a smaller platform we can afford to launch later on that platform.
Right.
PS5 can be the priority, and we can get out the Xbox version hopefully by like the end of the year, and hopefully in a good stead in Series S.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, what you really want is a game to come out and be quality. I actually don't as a PC player, waiting is just part of life. So, I think it's actually good that it comes out later instead of coming out with a broken Series S version, right?
This situation really is interesting though, because the specific ways in which the Series S differs from Xbox Series X is what seems to be the biggest problem here, and it is down to the memory more often than not. And if you're shipping on Switch, you're shipping on last generation machines, it's less of an issue, right? And we're often seeing Series S outperform the bigger consoles by targeting much lower resolutions, right?
We're also that happens, yeah.
Yeah, we're also seeing some games though that are UE5 where they scale the settings way back. Tom is looking at one now, which is that one, yeah. It's like N64 mode engaged, pretty much. So I'm very curious how this shapes up, and I hope they show more of the game soon, because obviously earlier trailers were always kind of unstable frame rate wise, if I recall, or at least they were 30, but are they going to go for 60? Is it really going to be the coalition that gets ambitious, that gets to a solid
60? Sounds really ambitious for this title.
I agree. Yeah. Given the level of detail they're going for, I feel like it's going to be difficult to hit. We'll see. Maybe on the PS5 professional. One more thing about though that I got to say that instantly, I have to admit, it kind of turns me off to this game. And I'm still interested in it, but they were like, yeah, we're putting out physical versions initially. That's just a code in a box. It will work. We'll worry about discs later. I'm going to come out right and say that behavior is bullshit. That is not acceptable behavior for multiple reasons. First of all, it's extremely wasteful, right? They're just trying to get sales from those discs. I get it, but you're just putting waste on the shelf, basically. There is no actual product there to use, really, I would say. I think they should stick to digital only until they can actually ship a proper disc version. Anybody that cares about, most people that actually care about physical media, they don't want code in a box. And this isn't the type of game I think that would have, I can understand an argument for hey, you have a Switch game, it's kid oriented, you want to put it on shelves so the parents see it at the store. I get that. And that kind of works in that case, even though I'm still not fond of the practice. But a game like this, especially if they're planning to do that later, I don't like it. I don't know. I mean, I assume, what do you guys think? I mean, I know Alex is whatever, I don't care anyway.
I mean, but the last game I bought in stores was exactly that. I bought Metro 2033. It has a disc, and on the disc is Steam.
Oliver.
Yeah. I think if they want to ship something, a little tiny box with a little code in it, and mark it as a code,
cardboard
that's
box.
fine. But if it's shipping in a jewel case, everything else,
the normal plastic case,
it's just ridiculous. And even if they do label it, I just think that's a
gross
no-go for me. It's not right. And most of my games are digital these days, but certainly if I'm going into a store and I'm buying a disc, I at least expect there to be a disc inside. I want that physical game for my collection. Right. So, yeah, I think in this situation, it's just not a good outcome. And if they do want to ship a game like this, then certainly don't ship it in a jewel case. I think that's just misleading people, especially if you're just looking at that on the shelf. It's not the right outcome.
Agreed. I think they should wait. I hope they do a proper disc eventually, and if they do, hopefully it'll be like the Alan Wake situation where you basically get all the patches and updates on the disc.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, I think there are good reasons to like not want to ship necessarily a disc on day one.
Sure,
maybe
these days.
Maybe they're coming in really hot. I mean, they could be coming in really hot, right? Yeah. We're actually having that situation with another game, which is Star Wars Outlaws, where they say they're going to ship a disc, but you're going to need to connect it to the internet to update it to actually use it.
I hate that.
And in that case, yeah, that's also a very bad practice. But in that case, they're basically saying, hey, we actually can't ship this game with the amount of time that we have, get it pressed to a gold master, right? At least they're being honest about it here. It's like, I don't know about this. I don't like either situation, obviously, but maybe they should, in that case, just delay the game by a couple weeks, ship it on disc, and have a better experience that way.
Didn't this happen with Jedi Survivor as well, where I believe the disc version is useless? It basically needs to be patched to played.
Well, a lot of versions of that game are useless.
That game. This is another Star. What a mess that was. But
another week of us banging on Star Wars Jedi Survivor.
It's a good game, but I love to beat that drum on it, man. It launched in a nasty state. It should have been delayed.
Yeah.
But with that, is there anything else you guys wanted to mention from SGF? Now's your chance.
I think just Civilization 7. Curious about.
Yeah.
No gameplay there, right?
Not real trailer.
I was happy to see Sid at the end there.
Yeah, exactly. That's a personality.
He's become this kind of cute old man. It's just he's still there. He still loves the stuff. I think that's awesome.
Made me feel a little bit old, actually. But I'm curious. I haven't played actually. I didn't play Civ 6. So I can't comment too much on that, but I do have a fondness for the series. And it's also day and date console PC, which is interesting. Obviously, this is a game that, even though it is a strategy game, the entire design of it lends itself well to being played slowly. So it doesn't require RTS levels of micromanagement or anything like that. But I'm just curious always, as always, the interface as a result of that. Does it do split interface like Baldur's Gate 3, or does it just do unified interface? Like a lot of modern titles that are multi-platform. And I'm always not happy about that because I think the mouse and keyboard and controller have very different input priorities for a cursor and things like that. So we shall see, but I'm excited to see what it looks like.
Okay. Yeah. I think this was a good show, a good SGF. I enjoyed myself. I think for me, by far the standout announcement, even though I think that there's probably some Horizon fatigue, is the Horizon Lego Adventures, or Lego Adventures Horizon, whatever it's called. I think it's that's a really exciting game, and it's a new announcement, technically interesting. Yep. A lot of the other content was games that we've already seen, a little bit more footage, things like this. So for sure, I think SGF is kind of a little bit of a catch-all for the games that don't show up in the platform holder exclusive showcases. But I think they showed off a pretty interesting lineup of games this year.
Cool.
Yeah. I mean, I think my overall take is that I enjoyed that a number of trailers did specify what platform they were running on. That was good. And the Sony one, for example, I really like that they said mix of non-gameplay and gameplay. I really like that. I think every company should do it. Microsoft has to get way better about it. We'll see how they do it with the upcoming, because they've said a bunch of stuff in the past about it running on something or in engine or nothing, and then it bites them so hard in the butt. So
showing ray tracing features in gameplay footage when those are not in the game like that.
Yeah, looking at you, Forza Motorsport. So
stop doing that.
Stop doing that. Though I didn't watch all of it live. Though I think once again, just a full on 2 hours, just game after game, is a little bit intense.
Yeah, I agree.
It is a little intense for the my attention span. So I do actually prefer just larger breakout sessions with fewer games in general. But that's obviously not what Jeff is trying to do here. So.
Right. Cool. Well, I guess that'll do it for the SGF part of the show. I wanted to talk about before the Guerrilla Collective, which was sort of an indie showcase the day before. There was a lot of cool stuff coming out of there as well. Like Volgar 2, Volgar the Viking 2 was there. Night Dive announced their Killing Time remaster, and a ton of amazing looking indie games. But man, just the list is so vast. I don't think we realistically have time to go through it all right now. Yeah, I see your head shaking out.
No,
It's like,
no way.
No way. So instead, let's move on to a couple news items that popped up this week that I think we all found rather interesting right now.
Yeah.
Our next topic then is about 8K, the arguably failed TV standard that may one day make a resurgence, but specifically its appearance on a box. You see, when the PlayStation 5 and the Xbox Series X launched, both consoles had either an icon or a blurb of text noting that they support 8K, but obviously neither console supports 8K. This week, however, it became clear, and based on various things we've seen, including on the PlayStation Direct, on Amazon listings, photos of real boxes, Sony has finally removed the 8K label from the PS5 box. And this is an interesting thing because fundamentally, I don't think anybody realistically expected quote-unquote 8K gaming. Like, there is one native 8K game between all the machines, and it's The Tourist on PS5. Which technically does do a full 8K frame buffer. They're doing it, but there's no way to get that to your screen. And that comes down to them just not enabling this feature at the firmware level. But there's also some question as to whether it actually could be supported. So as we know, PlayStation 5's HDMI output is limited to 32 gigabits per second, while Xbox goes up to 40 gigabits per second. With that in place, what that meant right now is if you're doing 4K 120, the PS5 needs to switch to chroma subsampling of 422, right? Which is actually the same if you do Dolby Vision on Xbox, which also has to switch to 422 because Dolby Vision is a 12-bit standard rather than 10-bit. So that bumps up. Although the whole chroma subsampling stuff's weird because, like, if you do 4K 60 on Xbox, it's also limited. It's limited to like 420 and 422. You can't do 444 at 4K 60 on an Xbox. But if you do 4K 120, you can do, but not Dolby Vision. You can do 444. PS5 does 444 in all modes except for 4K 120. But 32 gigabytes per second, I'm not sure is enough to handle an 8K 60 output. I think it could do it with 420 chroma subsampling. And by the way, for those that are confused by these numbers, essentially you think about each of those digits represents sort of like the resolution
RGB.
of the color values of RGB, right? So if you have 4, in this case, 4 is like full native match resolution output, right? If you do like 2, it's like half that, versus 0, it's like quarter of that, right? So 420 is like quarter res on red. And then I forget which ones are limited, but it basically reduces the resolution.
Green is the one that's kept high res, if I'm not mistaken.
I think green is the high res one, but it's basically reducing bandwidth cost by reducing the resolution of specific color channels, right? It's a long old school thing. It's been around forever. This was always used in like video compression formats and different broadcast things. It's a very common thing. It's still used today. It's not actually that noticeable in high res though. But the PS5, I think, would have to do 420. The bigger problem there, though, is that it would also be limited to 8 bits per channel. So 8-bit color, you need 10-bit for HDR. Otherwise, you get severe grading. So it's very likely that the PS5 could not support 8K 60 output with HDR at 10-bit. With its current hardware level. So even if they did enable 8K, you wouldn't want to use it. And frankly, the only reason to enable it at all would be to essentially have the PS5 do the scaling versus the TV. Xbox, on the other hand, I think actually could do proper 8K 10-bit. They would probably still need to do chroma subsampling, but I think they could do the full 10-bit no problem. So you could actually get 8K 60, but alas, that one also doesn't support it. But I say alas because ultimately 8K has not panned out. It was probably thought to become a thing in 2020 when these shipped. But fundamentally, I think 8K right now is a bad idea. It's not worth buying them because you're going to be upscaling basically everything. The bigger issue here, though, is like they put 8K on the box and neither system could support it. And while I do think they were probably trying to get ahead of the ball, realistically, it's not accurate. They put information on those boxes that is not true. And, you know, when you take that off, I mean, what do you guys think about this? Should it have been there in the first place? Are you happy to see it gone?
Should not have been there in the first place. I really like it was a joke. It was really a joke back then because the
we
lack
joke
of
about that a lot, right?
yeah, like the lack of penetration of the panels themselves in the market at that point. And then we already knew how ridiculous 4K was for like we even said it like before this gen started. We had like a ballpark idea of like where the GPUs were, and we were like, yeah, we're not. I doubt they're going to even be hitting native 4K for a lot of games. Turns out to be true, but like then quadrupling that to get up to 8K. No, it's ridiculous. That's why the Tourist is the only internally rendered to our knowledge. There could perhaps be others that we just don't know about.
That's true.
But like there's a reason why. And yeah, I just thought it was dumb. And then putting it on the box was just like, I'm a little bit shocked though that there hasn't anything come out of it. Cause usually if you put a sticker on a box for a long period of time and it just never gets support, usually there's something that comes out of it. We've seen it in the past with the GTX 970, for example, 4 gigabyte on the box. That was a really big deal. Curious to see if anything comes out of this. I only know about it on the PlayStation 5, but you said it was also an 8K sticker on the Series X
yes,
box?
Correct.
John?
So essentially on the side of the box, it says 8K HDR and it has a little text blurb about that as well. So they did the same thing. However, like I said, unlike the PS5, I think the HDMI output on Xbox could technically support it. So I think Microsoft could realistically add this support if they were so inclined, but I'm not sure that there's really even any reason to do so, because I don't think the consoles would do a better job upscaling the content to that resolution versus the TVs themselves, right?
It's also a memory hog at that point.
Like outputting an 8K frame buffer.
There's still a frame buffer that has to be held somewhere in memory there, and
right.
the TV is going to be doing it otherwise, probably with worse input latency as a result. But like, I don't know if you want to just be already on memory constrained platforms, and yes, they are memory constrained.
Yes,
like just having an 8K frame buffer lying around for no good reason. I don't see any reason for it.
I genuinely don't think it makes sense in any case. It shouldn't have been on the box. And the thing is, though, is with the removal of it, people were like, "Oh, they're just gearing up for the PS5 Pro. It's going to be 8K." I'm not convinced. I really don't. I don't think the PS5 Pro will support that either, or be designed.
I hope it isn't.
I hope it's not. It shouldn't be.
Yeah.
It is.
If it does,
it's a waste of time.
If it does, I want to make a video like I did with the RTX 3090 with 8K, and I was like, this doesn't look good.
Here's the thing, Alex. Remember during the 39 era, NVIDIA was talking about 8K gaming, right? That was kind of like a marketing beat at one point. That went away. When they released their newer, more powerful cards, they really didn't talk about 8K anymore. And I think what's happened is like nobody cares about it. And you'll have the pundits that say, oh, well, people used to say the same about 1080p and 4K. But I think the difference here is that, yes, while more pixels can be desirable, we've reached the point, especially in a living room setting, where you can't perceive the difference much anymore. Like we've reached the limit of what our eyes can see at a normal viewing distance. Like, I think 8K can look really sharp, especially if you walk up super close to it, right? But it's something that I think most people aren't going to be able to appreciate much at all, even if it is available. And also, there's not many 8K displays being made. I think there's actually fewer of them today than there used to be.
Yes. Actually, what's happened in the TV market, which I've surveilled recently, as you have, as you have, John, is that it used to be the case that all the major TV manufacturers, at least those that were making high-end displays, were making 8K panels. But recently, only Samsung has been updating their 8K line every year. Everyone else has been, Sony will sell you an 8K TV, but it's like from 2022 or 2021, right? It's not their most
LG still has like
model.
a 20 grand, like almost 100-inch 8K OLED on the market.
Yeah. So, like, I'm just hoping we stick with 4K for a good while longer. And a big reason for that is because, like, I don't know if people remember go back to like 2010 when Apple was advertising their iPhone 4s, right? But they were talking about the concept at that point of a retina display. And I think people really need to keep in mind that the human eye is limited in terms of the arc minutes of detail that it can resolve at any given time, at a given distance, at a given panel resolution, at a given pixel density. So, like, 4K is already a really high resolution for TVs, in my opinion, at
I
typical
agree.
viewing
It
distances.
is.
It's
Yeah.
really high to the point where, like, we can go quite low res with content. We can go to 1440p with content and have it look good, even if we're just doing a simple bicubic upscale or something. It can look quite good. And with games, it's going to come down to a lot of factors like the quality of the anti-aliasing or whatever. But with video content, if it existed, I'd struggle to see the difference between 4K and 8K at any reasonable distance. Indeed, when I've seen demos of 8K content, on like 85-inch panels, like huge panels, I've had to go up like really uncomfortably close before I feel like I can actually resolve that detail in a way that would actually be significantly more appealing to me than just looking at a 4K encode of the same content.
Right.
And then beyond that, you just have like a total dearth of actual 8K sources like Netflix, Amazon Prime, iTunes. They're not going to show you 8K content.
Even
Those services aren't even necessarily delivering a top shelf 4K experience because their bitrate is limited. There's no 8K physical media to my knowledge.
Nope.
There's no looming standard in production pipelines, because you got to think about this as well, right? For television, for movies, for all this stuff, people are not producing content at 8K. They're not shooting at 8K except to crop it in afterwards. They're not doing VFX at 8K. They barely started doing VFX at 4K.
Right.
Right.
So, I think it's just an issue where, like, the utility of it in terms of that pixel density, it's not there. I really don't think it's there in most scenarios. Maybe if you're looking at a nice big monitor, like a 27-inch, 32-inch monitor, I could see some utility. Like I'm looking at a 5K monitor right now. I can barely see the difference between that and a 4K monitor of a similar size. But for a television, I think the utility is a lot more limited.
Yeah, I think you're right. On the monitor thing, I was thinking smaller screens actually benefit more from high res because you're much closer to them. I would even say something like, Alex, Rich, and I are all using OLED screens as our monitor. I'm at a 48-inch and it's 42-inch and sit pretty close to it. Having more pixels could be somewhat beneficial to a degree, although you'd still run into the problem where you have to upscale stuff because you can't really run at those high resolutions. But I actually checked on LG's site here. They only sell 2 8K screens at this point. And the OLED one is a Z3, which means it would have been the 2023 line, and they may not have done a Z4. So,
right.
I think it's going away at some point.
The sales are really going down, and then also, like, alternatively, in the far-flung future here, I'd say that maybe there could be some real-time AI upscaling or something on the panel end of things, something like the Topaz, video AI stuff. Maybe if they get that running in real time, on some television set somewhere, that could give you a meaningfully better experience with 4K content than an 8K panel. Maybe that's a possibility. Maybe in the future they could add more detail to it. I just think that when you're looking at these super high pixel counts, the additional utility of adding on just more pixels, it gets to a point where it's not super relevant. In some contexts, it is relevant, like when you're looking at extremely dense panels for VR headsets.
Sure.
They're
that's the
extreme
one
pixel
space.
densities.
Yeah, you want that.
Exactly. But in these televisions, I think the utility is a lot less.
I'd rather see the feature set move in the direction of higher refresh rates for this. Like, I'd rather see 4K 240 become more popular. I mean, that's also ridiculous. Like, driving 240 hertz at 4K is hard, but we have now things like DLSS 3 frame generation. We have the proliferation of good upscaling up to 4K from lower resolutions, thanks to things like XeSS and DLSS. So, like, that seems much more reasonable than 8K from a gamer's perspective. And I hope it stays that way. And I don't think, for example, the PS5 Pro, if they are going to do some sort of 8K demo, I'm going to maybe want to pick it apart because I feel like it's a really big waste of time.
It's interesting, Alex, though. You mentioned 4K 240, but I feel like largely we've seen PC gamers largely pushing back against more pixel resolution in favor of more higher refresh rates. Like, popular PC displays all tend not to be 4K. The people that go for the highest end displays are picking lower res, but like extremely high refresh rate monitors over more pixels. So I really feel like there was like this ramp up to get more and more pixels. And then in the last few years, it's just kind of gone back down and people realize like maybe that's not where we should be going. And it's kind of fallen out of favor. And I really think, maybe 8K will eventually have some success. I'm skeptical that it'll be anytime soon but I think for now you can kind of put a pin in it. And like the attempt at an 8K wave has failed. Nobody wants it. It's not only is it not worth the money, it's not really that desirable in most cases, because again, you'd be upscaling everything, which who the heck wants that? Like, that's just not cool. So yeah, I think 8K is dead. Sony removed it from the box. That's good. It should never have been there in the first place. It was that's why we've always poked fun at it. Like, they were no. Well, it's part of the HDMI 2.1 standard, and maybe that also influenced them to put it on the boxes, where it's just like, oh yeah, HDMI 2.1, we could eventually patch in 8K support. But yeah. So there is one question from one of our patrons, Paul Kalamata, who asks, some of the commentary that I've read regarding the 8K label that was present on PS5 boxes suggests that it was a cynical and deceptive marketing ploy. I find this fairly difficult to believe, as I don't really see how that would have duped consumers into buying the console. When the console launched, 8K TVs represented a minuscule part of the addressable market, and the marketing around the new consoles and games revolved around support for 4K. Could that label simply have been present as a technical specification detailing something that the console could use in the future if content like video streaming became 8K? And now that they're removing the label, given that the uptake has been very slow and it's largely irrelevant part of the addressable market. Oh, now perhaps they're removing it because of that. Do you think it was actually intended to be deceptive, or do you think they actually had real plans to support 8K in the future?
I think they must have planned at some point.
Right.
Then I think they probably did expect 8K displays to take off more than they have, and they would have expected, like, hey, we need to actually service these 8K displays with content. We need to provide, I don't know, upscaling to the televisions. We need to show them something. Maybe we can have a couple games here and there that could actually do an 8K display mode, like The Tourist does all the time, right? They could do a few things. With PS5 Pro, it's more plausible, but I still think the issue is not predominantly the power of the console. Although the power of the console is not really there in that case. I think the issue is just the lack of permeation and lack of success of those 8K panels.
This does raise a question, though, regarding the HDMI standard. I wonder if PS5 Professional will solve that, the bandwidth issue being limited to 32 gigabits per second. Perhaps we'll see actual full chroma support for 4K 120. Like, there's realistically no reason why they couldn't improve that. And I'm actually surprised the PS5 has that limitation to begin with.
It was cheaper at that point in time. Really.
I guess so. I mean,
it was.
Chipsets around then were also a bit weird. Everything regarding 4K 120 and HDMI 2.1, that was a weird time when that first launched.
The standard's kind of not great in general, though, because you can strip out feature sets, right?
Yep.
So it's like
stupid.
It's not a great standard in the first place. In fact, the HDMI form is kind of bad.
I hate HDMI. I'm just gonna say it. I really do. Like, you just have these situations where, like, some cable just stops working, or you're getting handshake issues. Something's acting weird. It's not like an analog cable where you just get like a noisy image. You could kind of it's just like things just act a certain way and you have no idea why, and it's so frustrating.
A really classic example is you can buy a cable that is HDMI 2.1. It actually services HDMI 2.1 and it does all the feature set. But for our purposes, it also does other things that we don't want it to. Like it dithers the signal. So like I have a variety of cables that I can't use for my consoles at all because it dithers the signal, and then I can't get FPS data off.
Yep.
It's like, well, okay, what's the point of this?
HDMI, man, it's a mess.
HDMI,
everybody says, they're digital, they're all created equal or something, but no. There's a huge variance in quality that we've encountered. So, but anyway, let's move on to the next topic. Next up on the docket is another Sony product. It's PSVR 2. They finally showed off and announced the price for the PSVR 2 adapter for PC. And I want to start by asking this question from Andre Surlis, not Audie Surly, but Andre Surlis, who says, did Sony just kill the PSVR 3 by switching the onus of VR to PC? Oliver, Alex?
Well, I'm just going to say there's probably no PSVR 3 anyway, regardless of this thing, because it's not been successful enough for them. And they, as they showed in the recent showcase, it doesn't seem like they're doing first party games anymore from Sony that are going to be PSVR 2 targeting. So I just think it doesn't have an immediate future for them in the way they might have hoped after PSVR 1, you know? So I think that, but I don't think this will do much of it. I'm actually so disappointed with this. I don't think this product's going to do much of anything, actually.
Yeah.
I think that's a little harsh. I think it's a nice option to have. If somebody owns a headset, this basically opens them up to PC games, right?
Sure, it's an interesting addition, I guess, if you already own it.
It's a better headset than a lot of PC VR headsets as well.
But so that's the thing. So this is where we have to get into the technical specifications, because it's better than a lot of PC headsets because of XYZ feature.
But not necessarily, though. Even if you strip those features out, it's still better.
Well, I mean, but you're not getting the things that actually it does that are more interesting than left or right or other headsets you get out there.
I agree. I'm just
so
saying.
Yeah, I'm just saying, like, see, to me, this seems like a really poorly thought out product, because it's not taking advantage of the things that the initial PSVR 2 was advertised for and known for doing and is capable of. Like, it won't be shipping with HDR. It won't be shipping with adaptive triggers, which is something we talked about actually when they originally was, like, this was being floated in rumors that it's going to be happening. And I was saying, like, well, they don't support adaptive triggers wirelessly on PC through a Sony driver for the DualSense. Will they support it here? Because it is possible to actually do that on a technical level, but they just don't do it for some reason. And then they're shipping this and they're not going to support it. They're also, the reason why they're not supporting things like HDR seems to be a bizarre technical limitation that they've introduced into this adapter by making it be DisplayPort 1.4. I feel like we were just talking about HDMI 2.1. I feel like this adapter would have been way better as an HDMI 2.1 adapter, because most people that have PCs are actually probably connecting their PCs to their monitor via DisplayPort, because that is the common standard. Yep. I know DisplayPort 2.0 is not found through every device out there, but HDMI 2.1 has, at least since Ampere and RDNA 2, been on everything. And those would be the power level feature set that you'd probably want to support. And I feel like HDR should be capable, but they just decided, seems a little bit arbitrary to me to just support DisplayPort 1.4.
Well, DisplayPort for 1.4 could handle it, though. That's the thing. It has the bandwidth to do it.
Yeah, it's maybe not at the native res, though.
No, it has the same bandwidth limitation as the PS5 itself, which is 32 gigabits per second.
Well, then I'm right? Beyond at this point.
Well,
not sure why.
Yeah.
So the bandwidth is there. It's 1.4 isn't really necessarily the limiting factor here. They just made some strange decisions, I would say. I was also annoyed by that at first, but then the more I thought about it, it's like, look, there's a lot of headsets on PC. This is going to go through Steam VR like most other headsets. Most games in VR don't support these features, and it's unlikely that developers are going to put time into adding PSVR 2 specific features to games that are in not in most other headsets. Right?
Like, are there any PC VR headsets that support HDR?
Does the let me just, I reviewed the Pimax Crystal, and that was extremely bright, but I can't remember if that's HDR in VR is like pretty much like a super rare thing. And here's the thing about it, though. I liked the idea of HDR in VR at first, but I've actually come around to the fact that it's not actually that good of a thing in most cases. The reason being, the brighter you drive these panels, the worse the persistence blur becomes. So PSVR 2 especially, if you play this at full brightness, you get awesome HDR, but if you move your head around and stuff's moving around, there is persistence blur, just like you'd expect from like a modern TV without black frame insertion or anything. It's very blurry in motion. The Quest 3, of course, uses an LCD, but it drives it really hard, and Meta has figured out how to solve the motion problem. And as confirmed by Blurbusters as well, the Quest 3 delivers perfect motion. There is no visible blur at all. It is 100% perfect. It looks phenomenal. So the motion clarity there is really high. The problem, though, is that they use LCDs. They're able to drive it in such a way that they're basically overcoming. They're driving, I think, the panels bright, but they're sort of, you lose that brightness because of the way they have to strobe the LCD, right? If you try to achieve that on the OLED panels in the PSVR 2, it would become very, very dim, I think. So they can't realistically do that. But it does give me some hope on the PC that if you play games natively at 120 hertz, you turn the brightness down, it's not HDR, that you can achieve better motion clarity on the PSVR 2 than what you get natively on a PS5.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm usually not sensitive to motion blur on panels, or too sensitive to
You're
motion
lucky,
blur on
dude.
panels.
Let me tell you.
Yeah. But I will say that with the PSVR 2, and with the earlier PSVR, but especially with the PSVR 2, for whatever reason, I did notice that persistence.
It's quite obvious.
Whereas with my MetaQuest 3, it's very smooth.
Right, it's perfect,
very
right?
clean. It's
like there is no motion
It's basically
blur.
perfect.
It is.
Exactly. So, yeah, I think that, I don't know, the PSVR 2 is maybe not that fantastic of a headset, especially when you strip some of these features out. I do wonder a little bit, with the pretty high resolution of these displays, exactly how easy this will be to drive with a typical GPU without the foveated rendering through eye tracking, right? That could be a bit of a concern.
I mean,
Yeah.
it wouldn't be any different than driving, like, say, a Quest 3 on your PC, right?
Yeah, similar,
isn't it
right?
a bit higher? Is it similar resolution?
I think Quest 3 is higher res than the PSVR 2.
Oh, okay.
Different refresh rates, though, right?
And, well, it can do anything. It can do up to 120
Okay.
hertz on the Quest 3.
The basic idea, though, that I was trying to communicate earlier is that I feel like this is just like, if you already own a PSVR 2 and have a PS5 and also happen to have a capable PC, this is like a nice addition, but it doesn't do anything to broaden the market or entice PC only players to get it. I still think you should get a MetaQuest 3, like, if you're really into PC VR.
Completely
so
agree.
like, so I feel like I don't, like, I'm really curious about, like, they're always talking about expanding the PS5 market from like a CEO perspective and stuff, or like expanding the Sony market, whatever that means. But like, this doesn't do anything for that, I don't think.
No, I think this is more like a, well, we need to give this value to the customers kind of thing, because the PSVR, it does have support, but not like huge amounts of support. And there are actually good games on there for sure. But like, this is basically like, okay, you own a PSVR 2, go ahead and use it on your PC as well. So you can access all these other VR games, which I think is not a bad thing to offer to customers.
It is giving up a bit. It is like
Sure.
a concession prize, I think.
But it's still,
especially with like the new Astrobot game doesn't even support a VR mode, which is crazy.
so I think the reason there is more like the original Astrobot was really made around VR. And I think just like grafting VR support onto a pancake game would not work. I actually did confirm real quick the resolution thing. So PSVR 2 is 2000 by 2040 per eye. MetaQuest 3 is 2064 by 2208 by eye, so 2208.
Oh,
So the
okay.
Quest 3 is higher res than the PSVR 2 as well. And it does 120 hertz from your PC if you go all the way. Though I actually think 90 hertz is kind of the best choice for Quest 3 for battery considerations. So there it is. I mean, it's cool that they're offering support. It's a bummer that they're not adding those extra features. But at the same time, like I said, I understand it to some degree, because who's going to code in those features just for the PSVR 2 headsets on PC? Probably not anybody, or very few.
Well, I mean, it could be for those games that, like we just saw last week, there are a lot of ports from PC. So like, it feels like it could become a thing, and they could do it, but they just didn't.
Yeah. So that's a bummer thing then. So, all right. Let's move on to the next topic. Finally, the final topic of today's show. It is Microsoft AutoSR, exclusive to Qualcomm, was, I guess, shown off. And this is kind of an interesting use of AI upscaling within Windows. And Alex, you wanted to talk about this one, and I'm curious, and of course Oliver as well, because anything AI based, we got to get Oliver's opinion on it. So why don't you take us through this one, Alex?
So the idea of AutoSR is that within the current driver that you have from NVIDIA, not Intel to my knowledge, NVIDIA and AMD, you have the ability to upscale your monitor's resolution essentially from a lower internal resolution using some kind of cheap, not super high quality upscaler. For example, on the NVIDIA side of things, it's a Lanczos filter. You know, they label it as such. On the AMD side of things, you can turn on universal FSR 1 support, and we have obviously a lot of video coverage about the quality of FSR 1. And the idea is that's pretty annoying, actually, if you want to do some sort of cheaper upscaling that has a level of quality to it, because you have to like downsample or you have to upsample your entire monitor resolution and turn that on before you start a game. It doesn't really make a lot of sense, actually. It's not like, for example, like the Steam Deck has a better way to do it if you want to use FSR in a universal manner. Here, AutoSR is a product that will be enabled to Copilot, Qualcomm Copilot Plus. What do they call these PCs now? They have a weird name.
Copilot Plus.
Copilot Plus. Whatever that is. The Copilot Plus PCs.
Right.
That will essentially, you enable it in the settings, apparently. And as a game is starting, it will then automatically scale the desktop and the game to the output resolution from a lower internal resolution. And here they did a quarter resolution scale. In the preview they showed, it was output 1440p, internal resolution 720p. And instead of doing a simple normal spatial scale operation, which there's, you know, half a century or longer of mathematics behind how to do it in a way, they're using a convolution neural network running on an NPU in these Copilot Plus PCs from Qualcomm. And I presume there's going to be support in the future for the other NPUs and perhaps also for graphics cards that support things like DirectML. To do this higher quality upscale operation, much like you might see from a video upscaler using machine learning or, I don't know, maybe even offline kind of stuff. The quality is something that we don't have a good sense of right now. They have some images on the blog about this, and Oliver can show them on screen here. And what do you think of these images, guys? Like, what do you think of them?
The images, I think, look quite good. The problem with this, well, first of all, this is a game that has an art style that probably lends itself to being upscaled in this way. It's a lot of clean lines, some cell shading, some relatively low frequency detail that probably does, you know, you can extrapolate and extend that and scale that through CNN pretty well. The other aspect of this that is conspicuous is they're not showing any video. And my worry with this is because there's no real ground truth here, it's going to be hard to get a degree of temporal consistency that would be really satisfying. And I think we do see that problem a little bit more with like Topaz, say, if you're looking at Topaz. And Topaz obviously has the benefit of being able to potentially look at future frames as well, which this is.
Or if you're watching the new 4K versions of Alien. And
yes, again, it's not a perfect technology, right? But looking at I would really worry about temporal consistency in motion. Because obviously the still frames can look quite good in this instance, but what does that actual temporal consistency in motion look like?
I'm curious about that too, and I'm very happy you pointed out that Borderlands is like the easiest case for them to do this because it's not going for realistic rendering, and it already has thick lines and like overly sharpened lines on purpose because it has black outlines on things those would hide a lot of the perceptual problems that you can get from a machine learned upscale. And though there is a curious note in here, so you have to think about it, the GPU is rendering the game, right? That means after it's rendered, it has to be sent to the NPU for upscaling. And they mention in the blog that it incurs around 1 frame of latency. I'm going to actually assume it is larger than 1 frame of latency. And that is a curious thing. I don't think that's the cost necessarily of them sending it there, but I think that's a processing cost. And I actually do think they may end up holding a frame. And that's going to be a little weird because there's the screenshot here of them comparing 720p to the 1440p SR upscale, AutoSR upscale. It's a picture of some plants, and they're both running at 44 FPS apparently. So there's no cost on the GPU side of things in terms of frame rate, but there is one in terms of latency. But if you look at the bottom right corner, there's this little patch of grass. I'm so sorry, Oliver, to make you do this. There is way tons of aliasing and undersampling on the grass of the 720p image. Makes a lot of sense. But if you look at the bottom right grass in the AutoSR image, it is completing subpixel lines in an interesting way. So I'm very curious about what this looks like at the end of the day. That is implying to me some sort of ability to reconstruct subpixel detail, thin lines. It's easy to like take a complete line that's low res and then upscale it, and it'll have like a certain stylization to it. But if there is no complete line and then completing it, that's always implying some sort of super sampling almost. So I'm always curious about this. DLSS 1 could do that in extremely rare circumstances that I found out back in the day. This is actually, DLSS 1 had access to motion vectors. This doesn't. This is probably going to be in some ways very comparable to DLSS 1, or maybe even better or worse. I don't know. But I think this is an interesting future that Microsoft is pointing at here. The ability to take low power devices and get some better quality output of them automatically without having to rely on things like DLSS and or XeSS or FSR2, either because the device doesn't support it or because it's too low power to make it useful. It also is good for maybe potentially older games or other use cases. I'm just curious to see what devices it comes to next here, as well as to try it out. I think this is a good video for us to look at in the time when it comes out. But as John was just saying right before we started talking about this, Microsoft has kind of poisoned the well with regards to AI due to them having really questionable motivations and I don't know, also products that are AI based to a certain degree that they've been presenting for a while now. And this seems like maybe a better use case for machine learning than other ones that they've presented in the immediate past. So John, what do you think?
I mean, I feel like we're in that point with AI where it's the popular buzzword and people are looking for problems to solve everywhere. And some of those problems are a perfect fit for what AI can do. These techniques can do. Other things perhaps not. And I think that's what's kind of poisoned the well on a lot of this AI stuff, is just companies trying to find everywhere they can to stick AI in. Obviously, Microsoft's recall situation may actually result in an actual recall. No, I don't know. It's real bad actually. That situation where basically that's the thing. It's basically a keylogger, not really AI so much. I would say maybe the search aspect of it is, but people figured out how to just pull all that data right out of there. But then there's the misuse of AI. There's the Adobe stuff as well recently you saw, where they said that basically they can take any of the stuff that you've done within their software and use it, which they don't specify AI, but I'm pretty sure it's to like feed their training models and all that with whatever people generate. Like this kind of stuff sucks. Like that's not good. But this type of thing, like just sort of like using these technologies to sort of provide a tangible enhancement to something that a user might be doing without, trampling on them in a weird way, especially as like an optional thing. Like this kind of like image enhancement stuff, it can be good and it can actually look quite convincing, but it can also look bad. And having the option to use something like this optionally, as I think it's interesting and it's certainly worth looking at. And these examples that they show here for this AutoSR stuff is cool. And, just by calling it AutoSR, I guess also kind of, it brings to mind things like Auto HDR, which I think has been a huge success for Microsoft. So if they can find ways to implement sort of these system level features that can enhance the image in some meaningful way, but is also optional. I think that's cool. I'm into that.
Yeah. That's a good spot with the grass there. That is resolving in a way that's like way more,
isn't it
characteristic?
Isn't it interesting?
Much more advanced techniques. It is interesting.
Yeah.
And I think that, like, to me, yeah, my assumption was that if they're not showing video, they they don't really have that ability. But if this is really producing a good result, even without the benefit of things like motion vectors, that is really compelling, and potentially it's very interesting because they talk about enabling it for 11 games at launch. But they make a point of saying this could be enabled for anything really that can run the computer. So that's potentially very interesting.
So I have a question.
Whatever panned out with the didn't NVIDIA at least introduce something for YouTube videos or video playback?
Yeah, it's still in there.
That was not so good, I don't think.
I that was not great initially, was it?
They updated the model a while back, but I haven't really been paying too much attention to it. It was a little bit over sharpened.
Right.
I'll
be curious to look at that again.
They changed the model to be less so. But so the question is here. This is running on the Qualcomm SoC.
Right.
This has a certain low level of machine learning performance. According to Google, there is 45 tops here. I'm pretty sure those are int 8 tops. Does that sound familiar to anyone? Do you think this could run on Xbox Series X? I'm serious. Like, if you could take an old, I'm pretty sure like 8-int tops Xbox Series X is like 56 or something like that. Maybe it's even like 48. It's like a lower number. You could Google that. It's another number. I'm just curious if whether or not Microsoft could do the exact same thing on an Xbox Series X GPU, just incur a level of latency by holding a frame and letting it do its work, and then you'd get machine learning upscaled Xbox 360 games that, or earlier, that never ever got updates, for example, to be Series X back.
I think it's 48
Plus.
tops, int 8 tops.
Yeah, so that is putting it on a technical level, which these things are not always directly comparable, at least on a level of this NPU in the Qualcomm Snapdragon X Elite and Plus processor. So do you think Microsoft would dark horse this onto Xbox Series X?
That'd be fascinating.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. I just kind of thought about it now.
I mean, a big part of this has got to be the fact that they're able to run it on an NPU that's totally separate from the GPU architecture, right? So
yeah,
that's a big part of making this performant. The fact that it is running in a performant way on low power silicon is very encouraging, though. It's just that this could really work quite well across a range of low power laptop devices and things like that. So
yeah, that's the good.
And now it's time for everyone's favorite part of the show, where we take questions each week from Patreon supporters such as you. And we post them here in this spreadsheet for us to read on the show, which we're going to do right now, starting with not Corridor 7, but Container 7. Container 7 asks, I hear that Rich and John and Alex use LG OLEDs as their PC monitors. I've heard that clear text does not work with the subpixel structure of WOLED panels that LG uses. Correct. In regards to Windows text rendering, do either of you have any suggestions for making it work well on those panels?
So I just want to say clear text works to get white text looking better on an OLED with WOLED, but it doesn't work to get color reproduction for all colors being without like a chromatic fringe.
Yellow.
It may apply to certain greens, like yellowish greens as well too, but it's pretty much yellow. Yellow, you can always see like on the edge of a yellow, like the left part of it, like if you're looking at the screen front on.
Hold on, let me get close to see.
Like stage right or whatever of the screen, you can see, I'm pretty sure, a red line on the left side of a yellow.
Yeah, yep.
I think that's the way it is. So that is the unfortunate thing. This is another Microsoft dragging their heels moment.
Yep.
Where they have the potential to do this, but they would rather keep making right click in Windows 11 more useless. They would rather add a co-pilot to your PC, instead of like bringing like a meaningful image quality boost to Windows for modern displays, which WOLED is increasingly
common.
Even this occurs with QD OLED, I'm pretty sure too, doesn't it? The subpixel arrangement there is also
it's
not
also different.
It's also different, but it's going to manifest differently. I don't have a hands-on experience to know that, but I know that from the reviews that it doesn't reproduce color in Windows for text or yellow, green elements the exact same way. But like, this is a moment where like I've got used to it. In the first couple of weeks, it was pretty annoying, I'll admit, but then I just got used to it. I don't know. What was it like for you, John?
Mine's slightly smaller. When I was using a 48 as a reviewer, I definitely noticed it more, but now at 42 inch from sitting this distance, it's hard for me to pick it up, except for in the most egregious situations. So I don't really think about it. And it really is a very minor thing that only affects those very specific colors. And especially with, but only like if you have like single pixel width text that's yellow, for instance, like then you might notice it more, or like something that's embedded in a yellow color and you look closely, you might spot it. I don't think it's a big deal, but I do think it's still something that should be fixed, especially if you're somebody like, I'd imagine if you're using, say, a 1440p OLED monitor or something, right? With a WOLED panel or a QD OLED panel, something like that, it would probably be much more noticeable because it's lower res and you probably bring it closer to your face. Basically, the point is Microsoft should add support for alternate pixel layouts, subpixel arrangements on modern displays, because fundamentally that is shifted a lot. There are more display types out than there used to be, and it's time to keep up with it.
Yeah, why not, right?
Like Apple's starting to use OLEDs. I mean, they have OLEDs on some of their products as well, and their subpixel arrangements on the iPhone and everything. I mean, the very small pixels. It's not traditional. They handle that stuff well.
It's a pentile.
Yeah, I think it is. It is pentile, perhaps. So there's just a lot of variety out there in terms of subpixel arrangements now, and I wish Windows would, get up to date on this.
Yeah, 100%.
All right. Next one then from Songmin Lee. It says, why do some people say you should limit your frame rate to a couple frames under the maximum refresh rate when using VRR? I only turn the VSync on without any frame rate limit, and VRR seems to work fine. Also, Alex, do you still have planned to make a video on frame rate settings on PC? You talked about this on a previous DF Direct episode. Like, what's the best way to limit frame rate, RTS, graphics card driver, etc.? How to achieve smooth 40 frames per second limit without any erratic frame times?
What? Wow.
Okay. That's just commenting on your plan to make another video. Let's address the main part of the question, which is, why do you say to limit your frame rate to a couple frames under the maximum refresh rate? Alex.
So
for 100.
So if a game has reflex, you don't need to do this. If you have a VRR monitor, just turn on reflex, usually to on. I don't think you really need boost. I think boost is maybe about queuing, frame queuing at all of it. I actually need to really examine what boost does, but at least setting it to on, reflex to on, will do this automatically. And it'll do it better than you can do it externally. The reason why you do this was found out by Battle Nonsense, a YouTuber who kind of went dormant now, recently did an update just for Anti-Lag Plus to like slag on it. It was really funny. But the whole idea was that if you have VRR and you let it go to your full refresh rate, what it'll do is at your full refresh rate, say it's 120 or 144 or 165, then VSyncing will engage in the prototypical way it's been done the last 20 years. And it'll allow frame queuing to occur because it won't be double buffered VSync. Pretty sure it actually is triple buffered VSync at that point. So you don't want to do that because then you get a latency being incurred. And if you limit the monitor to below your refresh rate by a frame rate cap, it will make it so that VSync doesn't engage in the typical manner, and you're getting like frame zero all the time being sent to your monitor. And the thing that's changing all the time, though, is your refresh rate. That's the thing. The thing is, this is not foolproof because that requires a game to be 100% always at your what is it? How you say? You'd have to always be hitting your frame rate cap for this to work. As soon, though, as you're not and your GPU is being maxed out, you get back pressure on the GPU and it'll start frame queuing again, potentially, from the driver side. I think that's what it is about. So you always actually want to be enabling reflex. That's basically it. If your game doesn't support reflex, then limit it to 2 to 3 frames beneath whatever the max is. It's like 116 and then like 140 or 139 or 140 on a 144 hertz display. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yep. And yes, I'm going to make that video at some point. Rich and I just talked about it recently, and also within the context of DLSS 3.
All right. This is a quick one that would have fit with the previous discussion from Leftist Hominid. When it comes to getting into PC VR, what would you recommend? Getting the latest MetaQuest headset or to get a PSVR 2, which would also allow one to play Horizon Call of the Mountain on PS5? I'm sorry, PSVR 2 fans, you know where I stand. I got to go with the Quest 3. Given the choice. I still think it's just a better overall experience. But there are still some benefits to the PSVR 2. You mean, obviously using the OLED panels, it does mean that it can do proper blackness inside the headset. And there's some cool stuff to play on PS5 for sure. But yeah, overall, Quest, Oliver, I think they're
probably more. I don't know if maybe I'm going to back away from this claim, but there are a lot of exclusive MetaQuest games as well that you might want to try.
There are indeed, and many of them are quite good, I would say. Quest is a. So
the exclusives thing goes both ways.
It does. There's good exclusives on both, so that's something to look at. But there's also a lot of shared stuff there as well. But
Did Lone Echo ever come out to any other platform?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
Oliver might be checking right now. But for PC though, for me personally, and I know this is going to vary per person, I think having the perfect motion clarity combined with full wireless play is really a game changer. Just being able to play these PC games with such a lightweight headset and walk around freely without worrying about the wire. To me, that honestly makes a huge deal. I know some people don't mind the cable. Some people are looking for other things, and that's perfectly respectable. I think in this case, you should probably try out both headsets if you can. I've shown different friends both headsets before and had results recently where it's like, oh, I'm just going to get a Quest 3 after trying them both. So, yeah, that's that. Next one comes from Anxiously Chrono Triggered. It says, hey gentlemen, what was the first game you saw and thought, oh lord, this could not get any better than that? For me, it was when I saw Tekken 2 on the original PlayStation. I couldn't believe my eyes how good it looked. This is a fun one, I think, right?
Wow.
For me, I'll start with, so obviously one of the first times that happened was Daytona USA in the arcade. That was just insane seeing that at 60 FPS. But then it happened again when I got Unreal on the PC. I think I've mentioned this before. When I saw that waterfall on the first level after you get out of the ship, I went and got my family together around my PC, and I was like, I'm moved to tears here. Look at this. Nothing will ever be. This is the best thing I've ever seen. That was, and then just 3 years later, I had a similar holy moly type of experience with Metal Gear Solid 2. Which just seeing that moving with the rain was unbelievable at the time. And I think the fact that it still looks as good as it does today really highlights that they were just super, their art direction and the way they utilized everything to make that game look the way it does was exceptional for the time. So, gentlemen, Alex.
This is better than this. This is hard because at some point in time I had to realizing oh wait, there's offline rendered graphics, so it can get better than this. You know what I mean? There was at one point in time, I think it was when the first Quake ray tracing thing started happening. You could run Quake ray traced on your CPU at 1 FPS. Yeah. That's when I realized oh wait, we can do all this stuff that I never even thought about before. Yep. But before then, I definitely remember when I saw Halo Combat Evolved and I saw both the grass texture on Blood Gulch and also that you could look at a Marine's face and you could see the text moving down his face, or you could look at the assault rifle and see the ammo counter even in third person models going down. I was just how are they doing this?
What about
I can't even imagine this.
The bump maps in the Covenant ship. That
the bump maps in the Covenant ship.
You know that purple texture with like the repeating
the-
pattern where you look at it, it's like super detailed looking.
Yeah, also like the
Salsa guy
invisibility.
Xbox.
The invisibility I thought looked ridiculous. I just remember looking at the water in that game thinking it looked ridiculous. Obviously now Halo 1, like just like 2 years later, you'd be like, well, those are some pretty blocky models, right?
I gotta say though,
like,
I think Halo 1 looks better than Halo 2.
Halo 1 does look better than Halo 2. Yeah. But like that was a time where I really remember being like, oh, how in the hell are they doing this? It's obvious now. But I think the time after that, I've talked about Doom 3 before on the channel, but even then, since it was John Carmack, I knew he could do better. But when Crysis was initially showed off, not initially 2005 EXO, whatever, with the pre-rendered trailer, but when they showed like it was like CryEngine 2 demos of showing like the face and like CryEngine making you clear in quality games as the character who would eventually become Prophet is, I think, no, it was actually Jester walking around with a different voice. Like that's when I was just like, holy crap, this looks like a game from like 5-10 years in the future. And that was sure a moment where I couldn't imagine games looking better for the foreseeable future at all, for sure.
Yeah.
Oliver, as the youngest of the three of us.
Yeah, a little younger than Alex. I think for me, probably the game that really stood out to me was in 2005. I played Half-Life 2 on the PC for the first time, on a good PC too, with an 6800 GT and an Athlon 3800 Plus. So it was like a good experience. And that opening cutscene with the G-Man, Rise and Shine, Mr. Freeman, you know, that whole sequence, that just blew me away. The quality of the facial rendering, the lip sync, everything like that, it just really showed me something that I felt like I couldn't have in any other title. Also, of course, Doom 3, although I played that a few months later. That was also a big game for me. But probably the biggest one, the one that really stands out as being the most impactful, although I don't think it's held up quite as well today, is Gears of War, the original Gears of War.
I almost said that, actually.
Yeah. It was a sort of game that just in terms of the detail, in terms of the particle effects, in terms of what they were showing off, it just, when I looked at it, it was hard for me to contemplate something that looked better in real time at the time. It just
Isn't that
felt
nuts?
like
I know.
Yeah,
because now you look at it and it's like actually scales worse than a lot of the.
No, I
titles
look
we
at it,
just
it's
mentioned.
like the lighting is crap. And
But I'm pretty sure the first time I saw like the chainsaw execution, I like probably wet myself. Like that was ridiculous. looking. The first time you saw the chainsaw
in retrospect,
execution.
it's silly.
Yeah.
But also part of that was about some pre-release controversy where they were running the game, like a lot of 360 titles, they're running the game on PowerPC Max, right?
Right, I remember that.
They were demoing it on PowerPC Max with AMD graphics hardware. And they were saying, "Oh, we can get this up. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. It'll look great on 360." And I'm like, "Yeah, right."
Ran bad on this.
I've just played like Oblivion on this thing. It can't render that. You know, I've seen the grass textures in Oblivion. It can't render that. And then a few months later, for them to actually release it and it looking as good or better than I thought. I mean, that was such a
it ran really poorly in those.
All my friends in 2006 sitting around my like 40-inch Sony Bravia LCD, one of the worst televisions probably, you know, that you could imagine nowadays. Everyone was completely blown away. It was just mind blowing. But yeah, that was a special game for sure.
Wow, that's a good shout. For me, I specifically remember the second area of the game, when you're in that area with all the buildings, sort of that with the intricate architecture, and that sort of like you can sort of get a look at the ruined city, and then when the Krill first show up and like it's sundown, they're swarming in the sky. I was just like, wow, this is unbelievable. It truly felt like a next gen leap at the time. There's something I would like. That art style, it's very Unreal Engine 3, right? That's the look that we would get with UE3, but I think it would be fun to see that with like some SGSSAA or something, if that were possible.
Yeah.
Like really good anti-aliasing and super sampling.
There is a way with the OG PC version to do that, actually.
Oh, man.
I've never tried it in a long time. I know there's a way to force it. Yeah.
I think part of it as well was that we weren't so used to that UE3 style yet. This was like the first.
It was the first, and it was cool at the time.
It was the first. And like all those like detailed textures and the kind of glossiness of it and that super futuristic look, it just looked so interesting and appealing. And unlike anything I'd ever seen before at that point, really.
But then,
and then subsequently, it became a very boring style, right?
that generation in general had a lot of problems with that. And I would argue that in the end, I would look back towards older games that relied on things like pre-calculated light maps and be like, you know what, this holds up better.
Right. Gears is such an interesting. It's like one of the few ones.
It hasn't aged that well.
No, it really has not.
And there's all these like anecdotal things, like they shipped the game with like a ridiculously old Lancer model. Like if you look at like the Lancer model in third person that Marcus Phoenix or any of the Gears use, it looks like something straight out of like UT2K4 actually. And if you compare it to like the Gears 2 Lancer model, it's like so much better. And you know, I don't know. I do have a fondness for Gears for looking incredible when it released, but it's like one of the worst aging ones we mentioned here, which is odd. Because
Gears 3 still holds up wonderfully.
It does.
That's the one that holds up. Yeah, that one. Oh God, that Gears collection better be real, because I would like to see that in like full res, full frame rate.
Yeah.
You know. Yeah.
You know what? One other one, while I'm thinking about it, from that exact era that impressed me a lot at the time, weirdly enough, is Trackmania Sunrise. This was the first game I ever saw modern per pixel motion blur used in. And it looked unreal. Like I genuinely didn't understand how it was done at the time. I was like, what is going on here? Like this motion blur effect is unlike anything we'd ever seen in a game before. And it looked awesome. And not to mention that game was great. Only issue is that it's locked down by Star Force, which was a horrible DRM of that era. So yeah, but okay. There's just some good answers, and I agree with all of them. That's really cool, man. Let's move on to the next one then. Next up comes from Diego L. Ray, who says, "Hi DF exclamation point. How much are the consoles affecting RT adaptation overall? There are showcase games where Nvidia sponsors them and they get the suite on PC, but there are limited titles, and most, if not all of them, are games I personally don't care for. What does it take what will it take for more mainstream games like racers with licensed cars and GTA 6 to get full ray tracing features? Does it take the console being capable of 30 series level RT? And how do they get there with AMD? It takes a 7900 XTX to do 3080, 3090 levels of RT. Last I looked into it. It doesn't seem like the PS5 Professional is going to be that level unless I'm missing something. How do we get RT/PT into actually fun games? Geez, I don't know. That's a little bit harsh on the game
loaded
side. But this is for you, Alex. Enjoy.
Wow. How much are consoles affecting the RT adaptation overall? I would say generally positively, just because if they didn't have it at all, hardware level support, then we wouldn't have gotten almost anything. We wouldn't have gotten, Spider-Man wouldn't have those reflections that I think sold a lot of people on the power of the PlayStation 5, arguably more than Ratchet and Clank did, because Spider-Man's like a well-known IP and it's like, holy crap, And I think that was a big deal. I think it's generally positive. The only issue is obviously that the limited amount of power that can be done to leverage a lot of these effects at resolutions that people find palatable on a 4K display. And I think that's where it falls apart. And I think that is the one area where we're just going to have to just wait it out this generation until the next one to get it in a lot of titles that aren't UE5 based ones. And that's mainly it. I think we just got to wait a bit for the gen to start winding down, and then we'll start seeing things that we see on PC next generation coming to consoles at that point in time, because there's been a lot of hardware and API iteration till then. In the meantime, though, you've got UE5 titles, which in their software and our hardware mode are using it for reflections and for diffuse global illumination as well, too. So I think that's a good middle ground in the meantime. I don't know. What do you guys think?
I think it's a bit of a glass half full, glass half empty situation, like you said, Alex, where if the consoles didn't have RT acceleration at all, you can bet that we would not be seeing too much excitement on PC, or at least not nearly as much. But, conversely, if they had better RT, then obviously we'd see more. If the consoles did have fast RT, I can imagine things like hardware lumen would probably be the default in UE5 titles.
Right.
And that obviously has implications for the PC, because they that we tend not to see
Yep.
developers shipping both modes in the same title. But, you know, you'd still have to contend with PCs that are not capable of hardware RT, and those comprise a substantial portion of the PC market. You have a lot of people on older GPUs, lower power GPUs, even GPUs like the GTX 1650 are still being sold today. Those are not ray tracing capable GPUs. So I think it's kind of a mix of factors, and you can't discount the fact that on PCs, those older and less powerful hardware configurations are also holding you back, in addition to, you know, what you may or may not be too happy about in a compromised console by necessity, right?
Yeah, right. And just as a quite little clarification here, the 7900 XTX can only do 3080 or 3090 levels of RT in games that use traditional ray tracing. As soon as you go to path tracing, that GPU actually gets like a lower performance than those.
Right.
So AMD, in regards to what they're doing, they've been really just dramatically increasing the size of the GPU, which, like, if you look at the rasterization performance, the 7900 XTX is going to like cream a 3080, but it has to like drop down a gen lower to get RT performance, and then a gen lower than that to get PT performance. And so I think AMD, we still don't know what PS5 Pro is doing for its RT. I really, really am curious. But I think they need to just generally change their entire architecture mindset and actually go for full acceleration like Intel are doing, and NVIDIA too.
I was always kind of bummed out by AMD's approach to ray tracing, because I feel like it actually has fueled a negative sentiment towards RT, as people associate it with the one brand versus the other. And I think fans of AMD are very quick to just say, RT is a waste of resources, it's bad because the hardware isn't well supported in ray tracing applications, when in reality it should be. People complain about it, but it really is like, that's where we need to go with real-time graphics, and it will be good eventually for everyone. It's good for developers. It's certainly easier to build in light scenes when you can rely on ray tracing versus all the hacky rasterization features, which, hey, they can do a great job, but they're a pain to deal with. And I hope we get there at some point. I think we will. It's just a matter of time, but we'll see. All right, last question, guys. You ready? We almost made it. This one comes from Isfandiar. All right. I'm sorry if I butchered that. Seskira. I'm sorry. I'm bad at that. But they said, howdy, y'all. I've always wanted to say that. Should I read this in Farmer John style? Maybe not.
Do it.
Okay. I hope things are okay. I just heard that Night Dive Studios is going to remaster The Thing. That movie is awesome. So is Big Trouble in Little China, by the way. But the game was one of my favorite back in the day, but my PC weren't capable back then, so it was rough going playing it. I was wondering what games you'd wish you played first on better hardware.
That's a good one.
Apologies, but Farmer John made a quick reappearance there.
Farmer John is back
from my what was it? The farming simulator
Far
video.
Cry. Or was that Far Cry 5?
They were in both. It first showed up in Farming Simulator. Anyway, let's answer the questions. That is cool. We did see that Night Dive is remastering The Thing. What a cool little project there. That was an underrated game from back in the day. And it's kind of just disappeared, right? Like, there's not really any modern way to play that outside of just getting original copies, which a lot of people are not want to do. So I guess when thinking about what games you'd wish you'd played first on better hardware, one that always comes to mind was Far Cry 1 somehow. Because when I first played it, I was like, this is doing some amazing stuff, but it really didn't run very well for me. But I eventually did upgrade my PC to get ready for like Doom 3. So it was just a matter of months, if I recall. But I first played it in a state that was not great, and it was choppy enough that I found some of the design decisions more frustrating than I might have otherwise, because it wasn't running very well. Like the guys that can shoot you in the face from across the map, or the Trigen. Those were not great.
You could have been more forgiving of it if it was better looking.
Yeah. But in general, I wouldn't say playing in a suboptimal state necessarily ruins experiences for me all that much. That's just one I remember specifically, 'cause PC stuff tends to be more like that. I guess I could say, like, I might almost say Quake, but like it didn't negatively influence me. But when Quake first came out, I tried to play it on my 486 in a little window at like 5 frames per second in the smallest size, and it was horrendous. But I wanted to experience Quake, and I didn't have a powerful enough PC just yet. That would come soon, but at the moment, it was bad, and that seems like it would be applicable to this situation, but at the same time I don't regret having seen it on a 486. I find that amusing in retrospect, I don't know, do you guys have anything like this?
Yes, I got one.
Please regale us.
I played BioShock on a unsupported GPU, so that was a game that it was the weird Unreal Engine version, but they made it require DirectX 9.0C, and I had a X800 XT, which was only DirectX 9.0B shader model 2 whatever. And to get the game running, I had to use a user mod, which turned off some shading levels in the game. So things like water, like everything looked awful. Things like water was like black, I'm pretty sure. Most things had like the wrong color. And that's the way I played it the first time. And I definitely probably missed out on some of the larger experiences in the game. Like, like when you walk forward the first time, you get like the pistol, and it's like the woman where you can see the shadow map against the wall and like see like her like cradling the pistol in like the baby carriage. Like you're supposed to see it before it happens due to a shadow map, and you just don't see that at all. So, like there's like, it's just like I'm hearing audio at that point, and that was the experience, but I wasn't getting any of the like, like everyone is like, I couldn't remember when the FMV turned off and it turned into gameplay. I couldn't even remember the switch, but for me, it was painfully obvious when the FMV turned off. So yeah, that was how I experienced BioShock 1, and I don't think it was probably the best way to play it in retrospect.
Oh, wow. Would you kindly put a better graphics card in your PC?
Yeah, seriously, at that point. That's a fun one, John. We got to do that with the retro PC, because that's a funny PC version. It's an interesting Xbox version.
There's even an old iPhone version that's no longer available, as far as I know, but they did port it at one point.
We could maybe emulate it. I don't know.
That'd be weird. Oliver?
Yeah.
Yeah, probably the games I was playing in like 2004 on PC. So I had like one of those bog shelf, kind of crappy,
junk
laptops with like chipset graphics.
Intel like chipset graphics at that point.
Super low end chipset
Integrated graphics, baby.
Pentium.
Probably the games I was playing at that point. I remember playing Halo Combat Evolved on that. I remember playing World of Warcraft on that, and World of Warcraft was like a huge game for me. It really did shape quite a few years of my life, maybe too many years of my life. That was, it was just it was a gigantic difference, even in a game like that, which is built for low power systems, to play that on my 6800 GT system. Although actually, I did have even some appreciation back then for the less performant versions of games, because after I played Half-Life 2 and Doom on my PC, I actually got Half-Life 2 and Doom 3 on my Xbox, my original Xbox, and I played them there on a CRT with much weaker console hardware and a gamepad in like 2005, and I was really enjoying that. So, even back then I had some taste for that. The only other period I can think of is in 2014. I was kind of, between computers. For the most part, since then, I've had pretty good computers, but I was playing a game called WildStar, that MMO that launched in 2014 that did not do so well. Very good MMO, though. And I was playing on a MacBook Pro with integrated graphics in boot camp. I think an Ivy Bridge MacBook Pro with the Intel HD Graphics 4000. And that was not very good. It was like 720p, 25 FPS, just a pretty miserable experience. I was enjoying it at the time, but looking back, that was a bit of a depravity in my game playing history.
Halo's an interesting one where it supports fixed function hardware, like which would have been your Intel at that point. I'm pretty sure probably would have been fixed function.
Probably, yeah.
And but it would look like it looks like a very different game. That's another game we can do, John. We can show it on fixed function versus Xbox hardware. We could do a lot of fun stuff with that.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's some good stuff, guys. I appreciate it. All right. Well, that's it. That's the end of the show. You made it. I did my best to host it. Not quite rich quality. I certainly didn't try the fake British accent. But, you know, here we are.
We definitely didn't hear that. Yeah.
We survived it. We survived it. Thanks again for joining me, and thanks again to all of you for watching and supporting Digital Foundry. And we'll see you probably in like a day or two for another round of DF Direct for this special week of gaming. So get ready for that. See you next time.